Шановні колеги,
Dear
we
colleagues,
could use translation. Um, Шановні колеги, ми раді вас вітати на
dear
5-му
colleagues, we are happy to welcome you at the TIF Kharkiv International Legal Forum. I'm the first to take the floor in order to inform you that in this very room in 2017, just like you have just seen on the pictures, so in this very room, the first roundtable on business and human rights took place. Some of the participants present here today participated back then in that forum. The Institute of Human Rights of Denmark participates as well. It's very pleasant. And this year, this forum is different because the previous year was really nervous and hectic because of the events you well know about. But today, this is a new meeting of friends, of people engaged in this topic. So first of all, it's a big delight to welcome all of you here. And now I can pass the floor to our prorector. He traditionally declares all our events open, and he never refuses to get engaged into any kind of crazy things we offer.
Kharkiv Legal National Forum. I will follow on Ukrainian. It's much better than my English. I am sorry for it. Дійсно, у мене така скромна місія. Я поки що здатен на те, що
Indeed, my mission is at the moment very modest. The only thing I can is to open the event declared. But I'm the person who acquires lots of knowledge through such events. Actually, through such an event, I got familiarized with this highly relevant topic. And I would like to thank our partners, the Danish Institute of Human Rights, for supporting this initiative, for supporting the institutional development of this topic at our institute. My gratitude extends also to the Embassy of the Netherlands for supporting a broad range of projects. We've got also a new partner. This is UNDP that facilitates promotion of this initiative. This is the fifth forum to go. The first forum was dedicated to outlining these problems. People from the Soviet society have lots of stereotypes, and it's really complicated to promote the topic of relations between the state actors, business, and citizens. Today, this topic is gaining on importance. More practical aspects will be discussed by us tomorrow, and today I will say a couple of words as welcome of address about implementation of this topic into the curricula of law faculties, law departments. Together with my colleagues, we are working on the development of the education in the legal field. This is our mission, and I often say we. This means the authorities in charge of education, in particular education in the field of law. So we have to care about competences that are necessary for people that will be working in legal positions as judges, notaries, barristers, and so on. And it is also important to look at this problem through the prism of labor legislation. Some part of citizens still are overwhelmed by post-Soviet stereotypes, and the true responsibility of employers virtually does not exist, especially in the sector of private employment. It would be highly interesting to learn about inclusion of these components into the educational curricula for bachelors and masters. We are interested in inoculating these skills. Generally, we have about 20 universities that provide legal background versus China, let's say, where there are 650 of them. But recently, together with Alexander, we held the summer school for the educators, professors in the field of constitutional law. And by the way, our students can get access to education, master education through the external exams, but at the same time, even some professors are not aware of the horizontal plane. So the vertical plane is perceived as something normal, but it is not perceived that one may protect his or her own rights by suing the bank. The rights can be protected through the constitutional court because employers make some unfavorable conditions. This idea is something new even to professors, to lecturers. Therefore, I believe that such an international event with participation of our colleagues should become a serious incentive. We would like to promise to mainstream this component as an optional element of curricular. We would like also to raise the awareness of other our colleagues and the Ministry of Education. It is one thing to discuss, to debate, but it's totally different when you create an innovative curriculum for masters and bachelors. We've got a very innovative model at the moment that would be a good incentive to bring this problem to a new level beyond the academic discussion. I believe I have exhausted my time. I have to respect rights of my colleagues. Also would like to speak many thanks to my colleagues, to our partners, to the Danish Institute, to OSCE, to UNDP, and all other partners. Thank you. Thank you very much. This problem is really interesting because it's common for both business people and lawyers. The roots can be found in the economic field. Sometimes we have discussions with our colleagues from the US, and they say that for some reason lawyers dominate and over-dominate in this field. It should be, first of all, developed by the economists. And we are so happy to welcome here Ms. Marina Kopchuk. She represents the Ministry of Economy, namely the contact point of OECD. Miss Marina, do you feel that economists should also join these processes? Yes, definitely. Dear participants of today's roundtable, I would like to welcome you. Thank you for organization of such a wonderful event. It's such a pleasure that on an annual basis we can meet, we can exchange our experience, we can discuss the challenges we face with when implementing international standards. And what's more important, we can come up with solutions. Such discussions, such meetings are really crucial for finding the solutions, finding the ways to implement and mainstream these standards. I can say that this roundtable is a result of our continuous discussions with Ms. Olena. Throughout the year, we've been communicating with her on a regular basis, and of course, we both share the opinion that education is paramount. This experience, this education is crucial. So we last year adopted the action plan for implementation of the national concept of socially responsible business. And now we know our gaps, so we are lacking not just awareness, but also the knowledge, the understanding. We've held 2 rounds of the plan monitoring. Unfortunately, I should admit that the awareness is very low, just like the level of knowledge, especially among the representatives of the authorities, unfortunately. And regarding the economic specialties, the Ministry of Economy is in charge of business climate. It works with investors. It believes that the socially responsible business is an indicator for investors. So investors find it really necessary to see a responsibility of business. So lawyers and economists should get additional training. And therefore, today's event is highly important. I'm looking forward to learning more about this experience from other participants. Thank you very much. Thank you, and wish you all the success.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marina. And here, as far as I understand,
Thank you very much,
right
and
from Georgia. This is about experience of our Georgian
got
colleagues who
Georgian
started
colleagues.
working on business and human rights, and they included it into the national human rights strategy.
And the
So the Ombudsperson of Ukraine, now
Commissioner,
together
Parliament's
with
Commissioner
Ms.
for
Stepanenko,
Human
and Ms.
Rights, together
Stepanenko is
with Ms.
representative of the
Stepanenko,
Commissioner for
in charge of
Socio-Economic Rights,
economic
and
rights,
since 20
are also with us since 2018. We've been working actively in the direction of BHR,
so
and
we've been,
she has
and now she
just
has joined us
us
via Zoom,
through
but
Zoom.
unfortunately for
Unfortunately,
some
she's got
reason
some problems with her
I
camera,
don't see
but
video, but
hopefully we'll be
hopefully
able
we will
to
hear Olena
hear
Anatolievna. So Olena,
Miss
you're
Olena.
welcome. Good afternoon. I hope that you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you. I
Good
absolutely
afternoon. I
share
hope you can
all
hear me
the
well.
good words and wishes
I'm
addressed to
happy to
participants of the
join
forum.
this
And that's
event.
true. Well, we have
We
come
have
back from
just come
Georgia.
back from
So we went
Georgia.
there.
My
My
mission
mission
was
to be
learn
introduced to how our colleagues in
the
the
experience of the
Ombudsperson's office
ombudspersons
how much
office
progress
in
they have
terms of
achieved
guiding principles.
implementing the key
Implementation,
principles.
we have
So
already
now we have
exchanged some
exchanged documents, and that's
The
very
experience
interesting
is highly
experience.
motivating and
And I
inspiring.
believe
So the
that
exchange of these
this
positive practices
exchange of
is
positive
highly
practices is very
useful.
useful.
We've also
We
informed
have
our Georgian
informed our
colleagues about
Georgian
our
colleagues about
experience.
our experience.
In
In
particular,
particular,
I'd like
the
to
Ombudsperson's
mention
office for
that
4 years now has been participating in Kharkiv
Ombudsperson's
Law
office has
Forum.
been a
We keep
regular
this interaction,
participant of
cooperation,
the
and we are
Kharkiv
grateful to
Forum.
Yaroslav Mudry University of Law. We are grateful to Olena Uvarova, who is the head of the International Business Laboratory on Human Rights. And we are happy to see here colleagues from Danish Institute for Human Rights, our Polish colleagues, and I know that our Georgian colleagues will also speak. And tomorrow, participants of the forum will be welcomed by the commissioner, by Ms. Denisova. Marina has mentioned the educational activities, and actually we focus above all on educational work in the field of business and human rights. You know, I would like to confirm, and we monitor this information. Unfortunately, there is very low awareness level among not only public officials, but also among business representatives about these guidelines. So among the public, among NGOs, when I talk at all the platforms, when I speak about these governing principles, especially to local governments, there is interest to that, but only regarding what is that and where Ukraine is. So far we have a lot of work, and I know that the week of business and human rights that was held by following the initiative of the ombudsperson, it created impetus and interest among student youth to this topic, and we focused on promoting this information among those universities that the ombudsperson works with and that we have memoranda signed with. We publish this information via social media, via websites, and it was very nice when we were on business trips, when we traveled in Ukraine. It was very nice to see that, for example, on websites of all the state administrations, there was information about that jointly with the Ombudsperson's office and with the academics. They launched the competition for students' papers, works on guidelines for business and human rights. So I believe that we still have a lot of things to do, and we're very much interested in experience of all organizations who are engaged in this process, everybody who is interested in promoting the guidelines for business and human rights. And so let's come together and let's work together so that human rights in our country were protected. So thank you for your attention. I wish you inspiration and looking forward to positive feedback results that we are going to further implement. Thank you, Olena. I would like to welcome Ella Skibenka. She has joined us, and this is the person who back in 2017 started raising awareness of stakeholders of Kharkiv Forum, and it was really a very significant, substantial contribution, and I'm happy that you are with us today. And actually, from the official part, we can proceed further. And now I invite panelists of the first session to join us. Beata Faracik. Beata represents the Polish Institute for Human Rights and Business. And also for many years, we've been working together. Mr. Dirk Hoffman, this is Danish Institute for Human Rights. And I don't know if anyone can calculate the number of hours of our communication. Definitely, that would be a positive surprise. Ms. Tara Van Hu, I believe that this is one of the best known experts for business and human rights globally, and I'm so happy that Tara is with us today. This is Human Rights Center of Essex University in Great Britain, and Mr. Nikolai Sonderbai, who last year joined Kharkiv Forum, and this year, this was also a year of fruitful discussions, and I'm happy that Nikolai is with us this year too. Our first session, I don't know if Mr. Michael Santora will be able to join us today, but I cannot but mention this colleague. He is on the program, and I hope that he will join us soon, but it is only because he has family duties to perform, because he is taking care of the children, so that may interfere today, but definitely he's always accompanying us, and he is a very important person, including his recent steps where he initiated a special publication of Cambridge Magazine, Business and Human Rights. Was a volume on Eastern Europe, Business and Human Rights in Eastern Europe, and Beata, other colleagues together with me are co-editors, co-authors of this special volume. And many of you have seen the announcements, and we are looking forward to your abstract. So please join us preparing this publication. And actually, we are ready to start this session. And this session, according to our initial idea, will focus on the following question. If there is demand for knowledge in the field of business and human rights among lawyers, among experts in economics, and what are the modern trends that this demand is about? Whether someone who receives knowledge, education in the field of business and human rights, what kind of career should they anticipate? So we have actually several components to discuss: the trends that create the demand for this knowledge, and if there is demand, then what's the experience of responding to these trends, and if so, what could we rely on in the field of professional development?
Experience, what current trends could request such special knowledge, skills?
Thank you very much, Elena, and welcome to everybody. Thank you to the organizers for inviting us again. Hopefully we'll bring in some new knowledge this time as well. It's always a bit tricky. Particularly that the area of business and human rights is not moving in the eyes of many as quickly as I guess all of us would like to. But before I actually get to answering Elena's question, I just would like to recognize the fact that unfortunately one of the founders of this area has died recently. So I just would like to say that yeah, unfortunately, John Ruggie has died last week, and it was the person who I think like really the best understood the need to combine human rights and business and how tricky it is. And I think I was back then kind of at the stage of switching between government position and CSO. And I was one among the people who, being involved in some of the negotiations around UN draft norms, kind of found his approach a bit disappointing. We kind of wanted something stronger. And it's just with years that I've realized that actually he was right, that he understood the moment, and that the approach that he took actually helped to bridge the divide and the huge polarization that was between civil society and business in the mid-2000s. And I just cannot say how grateful I am to him and to his work for all that he did and for bringing us the UN guiding principles, which for us are just like really the founding document with which we work and with which we approach companies. And talking about that, I think it's kind of important to note that right now we see different developments also at the European level we see the Green Deal, we see also different developments that push European companies, but also other companies, because of all the investment connections into more sustainable direction, to being more environmentally friendly, to be more socially responsible. And yes, we kind of amongst the trends that I would notice recently is that this increased need for experts who would, unfortunately, not so much for business and human rights experts yet, but we see the demand for so-called ESG experts. And we still see that E and G are still much more visible than S, and in particular the human rights dimension of the social element. So E stands for environment, G for governance. But it is slowly changing, and there is definitely a huge need for experts who are able to combine the deep knowledge of human rights with understanding of how business operates. And it's extremely important that universities, but also other actors, actually help develop the body of experts who are able to combine the knowledge of those two areas. It's not enough to know in and out, human rights treaties. What is critical is to be able to implement those in practice, to understand how business operates, and how to build in different safety valves and fuses into how business operates on everyday basis to ensure that actually human rights are respected. It's not enough to know who won which case in front of the European Tribunal. Yes, you need this knowledge, but you need to know how to translate it into different tools that your company is using on everyday basis. And I think it's important that people do understand human rights, but they also understand how business operates, and they also should know local context, to know local dynamics and challenges. Sometimes though underlying issues that affect wider society or are stemming from the broader society, other ones that have critical impact on whether actions undertaken by business actually bring fruit. So I can only stress that yes, we see the increase demand for experts and slowly for human rights experts, but we are still not having enough of people who are able to link those two dimensions together on the market. So there is a huge demand, and it will be very growing demand in the next year. So initiatives like that of University of Kharkiv, of Olena and other colleagues who developed curricula that are trying to combine those elements is critical. And it's not that kind of like talking from, I'm not talking from some sort of imagination. We are working with some companies trying to raise the awareness, and very often different violations of human rights that are taking place are not meant to happen. It's not like companies do it on purpose. It's just ignorance and not realizing that some of the actions, that some of the business decisions they are taking, that they actually might result in some violations. That the fact that they kind of make a order for whatever products to be delivered at a very short date might actually require some companies to work overtime, and with no increased payments for those goods, people won't get paid overtime. So people need to see those connections, and it's our role as human rights experts to actually explain, to show the impact. So I would like to encourage, because sometimes it's very difficult to actually work with companies, also because as human rights experts, we are kind of accused of, oh, we are working with the bad guys. Well, if you want to change things, you actually have to work with so-called bad guys, which in fact often are not bad guys at all. And I think it's important to realize that very often people in companies do much more than we can say outside. And they are not communicating it for one simple reason, not to put their own staff at risk, particularly if they are working in countries where the political context is such that telling why they have done something might actually cause revenge from the government. So yes, I'm saying this to encourage young people to actually work with companies follow your degrees in human rights, but also work later on with companies. It's important to have people inside of those agents who know actually what they talk about when they talk about human rights. Thank you, sorry, because I could take up all this.
Thank you very much, Beata. Thank you for this insights. And my next question to Dirk. Dirk, we know that more and more countries develop the national action plans on business and human rights. At the same time, we know that one of key challenges is lack of business and human rights knowledge and capacities. Could you comment on this situation and what could be done with this situation? Is the first question. And the next question, we know that the Danish Institute for Human Rights has the internship program. And actually, I joked yesterday when we met at the airport with some of our international experts, and they said it's something like alumni meeting of Danish Institute for Human Rights. So, Dirk, please comment this.
Maybe, first of all, let me say, how nice is it to be in a room together again? This is my first trip in 2 years anywhere, and I'm so happy to see people again and not speak to a screen. So thank you so much for organizing and the invitation. I'm so happy to be here. Let me start with the second question. So as you pointed out, it's really kind of crazy how many people have a past at the Danish Institute somewhere. It touches maybe a little bit on what Beata was saying now. I think there are definitely jobs when you are dealing with human rights. You can still find jobs that have something to do with, business. You can work in government. You can work in investors. I think the opportunities are increasing where you can find employment because this topic is becoming more and more relevant. At the same time, I think you can also enter it from a very diverse range of universal studies. You don't have to study human rights to work in this field necessarily. You can also come from a political science background or an anthropology background or an economics background for that matter. I think human rights, in my opinion, is still not the easiest topic to communicate to stakeholders. I think it is important that all of us learn how to make it a relatable subject, translate it into what people understand, depending on who you're speaking to. So I think there's a need to bring human rights knowledge into other disciplines so that they can then bring it into their own work. So I think I'm really happy that this session or this day focuses on academics. I think regarding the second question on national action plans and maybe the lack of capacity, I mean, it's true that there are more and more national action plans. Specifically, Europe is pretty well covered. I would say in other regions, it's still very slowly coming up. I think there's a reason for that. And the reason, in my opinion, is that a lot of multinational companies are located in the European countries, and they were forced to publicly deal with these subjects way more. And civil society also was more aware of these topics. So I think that actually helped push for this on the political agenda. I still think there are some similarities as well when it comes to the capacity challenges, because seeing businesses as an actor that has impacts on human rights was also new to many civil society organizations or institutions in the European context. So that's, I think that's a similarity. The action plans that came out in Europe were widely criticized by national civil society organizations and other actors in the countries for not being actually action plans. Many of them were just repeating what they were already doing. There was not much innovation. They weren't particularly good. But I think they were still valuable. And I think even in other countries, these processes, I see them almost like more important than the end result is the process, because the process is an opportunity to build the capacity of different actors, to bring different actors into this topic and to raise awareness. Sometimes the first action plan may be very disappointing, or it may be unimplemented. And sometimes the national action plan may not even be the best tool for a country to raise this topic. If we take Ukraine as an example, you have a lot of national action plans on different topics, and various organizations in the country would probably agree they're not particularly well implemented. So what is the benefit of yet another action plan that is not implemented? So I think the action plans are not the solution to all of these questions. Sometimes we have to think of other ways of building capacity and raising awareness before there will actually be enough momentum in a country to get political support for a national action plan. And I think thinking about different ways of raising awareness is exactly what we're doing here. Now we're talking about how we can raise awareness already in the phases of studying, and in different disciplines. So I think this is a very good way to start.
Thank you very much, Dirk. And actually, when we are talking about business and human rights, often we talk about what leverage could be used to make this issue important for business. And one of such leverage, and I think that the most important and the most effective, could be request from society. And my question to Tara, what is your feeling? Do we have such request from society now? And if so, how we actually could raise such request at that societies that maybe don't have such request now? And what is you co-chair of the Global Business and Human Rights Scholars Association, and to my mind, very important institution. Please tell us more about your vision of the role of this association.
Thanks, Elena, and thank you for organizing this. Like Dirk, I am so excited to be with people and to have had the opportunity to travel to Ukraine for the first time in my life. So this is a real pleasure. There is a demand from society for businesses to change their practices. The level of that demand is very context specific, and it is often in response to the changing within a society. Whether those changes are brought on by a pandemic, whether they're brought on by natural disasters, whether they're brought on by man-made disasters like a dam breaking or a nuclear power plant collapsing. The context is quite specific. It's often quite unique to the society, but the demand is there, and it's a pretty universal demand to expect that businesses start to respect human rights as you would hope that they would, not just as you would aspire to, but rather as you would hope in a realistic context. What does it mean for a business to actually understand what their workers are experiencing, what the community around them is experiencing as a result of their operations or as a result of their products? And how can they reform to make sure that their operations and products, goods and services are better in compliance with the social expectation of those businesses? So that demand, every place that I've gone, and I travel a lot for this work, every place I've gone, people talk to me about that demand, whether it's the taxi drivers that I'm talking to or people on the train who overhear me practicing my remarks. People have this desire to see an economy that works for the population rather than an economy that works for only a small portion of those who are the most elite economically. How we translate that into something that's actionable is a complex issue. And this is, I'm going to echo what has already been said multiple times, that this is an interdisciplinary issue. As a lawyer, I am very good at analyzing whether or not a company is complying with the law, both the law as it is domestically and the law as it is internationally. When it comes to getting companies to reform their practices, that's where I rely on people with very different disciplinary skills. That's where I bring in the sociologists and the anthropologists and the business ethicists. That's where the human geographers are really key and crucial to expanding our work, because getting businesses to hear that what they've been doing for a long time isn't working is a really hard sell. None of us like to be told that we're wrong. None of us like to be told that what we've done has had adverse consequences. That's true for us as individuals, and it's true for corporations. So every time I go to a corporation, every time I'm asked to go to a corporation to talk about their impacts, I know that it's an uphill battle, because what I'm saying to them first and foremost is what you've been doing is harming people. Now let's talk about how you do it better. And getting them to listen to that is hard. So the demand has to be widespread. It has to be interdisciplinary. It has to be coming from a variety of factions, both internal to the country and external. So you're talking about your civil society, your academics, but also the politicians have to be involved. Legislation is a key component here. So that's how we get to where we're going. In terms of what the Global Business and Human Rights Scholars Association does, is we really work with academics around the world to translate their knowledge into actionable research that has a broad-based audience. Academics can and do engage with corporations. I am often brought in not to be an advisor to corporations, but to be an external critic before they hire somebody who sounds better and more in line with their own brand visions. But there are amazing academics out there that do work partnering with businesses from the inside. When they do this, there needs to be a benefit for the academic as well, a benefit that goes beyond monetary financing, right? Like the reality is businesses will pay me more to do what I do than any of the NGOs I work with. But that's not enough to justify the use of my academic knowledge in that way. So what we're talking about when we talk about academics, it has to be something that can feed back into our research or feed back into our teaching. And when we talk about feeding back into our research, the question is then, how do we use that research? How do we get that published? The reality is that to date, business and human rights is Western dominated. It's Western European dominated. That means that the scope of it has a very limited understanding, imagination, legal construct. Law and economics are both social constructs, and they are dependent on our imaginations. And as we took a tour this morning of Kharkiv, and it was an amazing tour. And I kept thinking how different the social and historical and economic history of Ukraine generally and Kharkiv specifically is to where I grew up. Which means that the legal imagination of people here, the social imagination of people here will be different than what I can imagine in the small little confines of a mind of a girl who grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Taking that imagination and making it actionable is a really important part of academics' mission. And it's hard to do sometimes, but it's the necessary work, because if we're going to transform our economies to be something that's sustainable, to be something that respects our societies, what we need is for an imagination that isn't dominated by Western European constructs of society, of ownership, of community, of history. And so getting that knowledge from places like Ukraine, like Belarus, like Poland is so key to the future of our field. And so what the Scholars Association does is help you take that knowledge, help you take that imagination, get feedback, and figure out how to get it published for a wide audience. Because knowledge builds on knowledge. And so if we can bring your voices into community with people who are like me, born and bred in Western Europe, with Latin Americans and Africans and Asians, to talk about the future developments, we can actually formulate the kinds of solutions that are long-term and necessary for society. So that's what we do, is we work with scholars to do that.
Super, great. Thank you very much, Taran, because I know that someone could have concerns that this topic could be too academic. So, because a lot of academics work now on business and human rights. So, yeah, thank you very much. And Nikolai, we met 1 year ago during the last Kharkiv forum and virtually, but yeah, and today is our first meeting in person. And my question consists from two parts. The first part is about actually UNDP, but in global context, because we know that UNDP actually is involved in actively to different developments on business and human rights in the world. And it could be great to share with us with this experience. And the second question is about Ukraine from your perspective. What is your feeling? How this current global BHR trends impact on Ukraine or not?
Thank you, Elena, and thank you for taking me really in the spotlight, because I think I will use this presentation for tomorrow instead. And first of all, let me say I landed in Kiev just a few days before last year's Kharkiv fourth forum, and was participating online, and it's a pleasure really to be here today and meet with a lot of academics, but also practitioners devoted to promote business and human rights. In terms of UNDP globally, I come from Danida, from the Foreign Affairs, and I've been a human rights lawyer myself in my previous life. And been around the world, so I'm not sure I can speak fully into that, but I can give an overall picture. It's certainly on the very high priority of UNDP's global human rights program. It's an increasingly, I think since 2016, we really stepped up the work, and this started in Southeast Asia. Maybe Dirk, you have more actually experience working with UNDP in that region, but I work now very closely with the colleagues there. Then since then we have working we're stepping on this field, supporting both government with similar things as the Danish Institute in terms of helping with of course the National Action Plan in multi-stakeholder inclusive processes, but also in terms of helping the private sector in creating both human rights principles, helping them in making tools with regard to human rights due diligence, and advising on grievance mechanisms and effective remedy, basically in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, in the Americas, and now in Europe as well. And we are now starting and scaling up this work in Ukraine. As you said, we've been in quite close contact the last year, and with many stakeholders around here and a lot of the fellow viewers. I think in terms of Ukraine, in terms of the relevance here, certainly, the positive news is there's a political momentum now, because business and human rights is in the National Human Rights Strategy and in the action plan, as well as the specific plan that Marina mentioned on social business. But this is good news. There's a lot of work ahead now in terms of qualifying the data. There was a good baseline that you and the Institute have been involved in with the Minister of Justice from 2019. But I think there is really a need to further qualify this data and to really fully understand the barriers and the gaps within the different business sectors, but also understand the needs of the right holders, whether it's a rich oblast, a poor oblast. I mean, there's huge differences in Ukraine. When you work in the Donbas region, where UNDP is also having a presence, you also need to apply a heightened risk approach to your risk management if you are a business. There's a lot of continued business-related human rights violation, as well as environmental law violations in that region, as there is in other fragile and conflict-affected areas. So I think it's hugely important here now that we continue to support the National Action Plan process. We work in partnership, and that we establish more qualitative baselines and really in-depth information with regards to the sector, but also on the market opportunity. with the new with the resolution from the European Parliament from March this year, and the hopefully the European Commission directive later. Of course, we are witnessing this rising demand on state regulation on which we haven't seen before. So I think this is a very positive trend that we see now, this mixture of voluntary but mandatory legislation. But we need, so there's a move towards ethics, transparency, and the green climate change adaptation, and perhaps a new global business model. But again, you know, to what extent is this driven by the investors, the consumers, or the different advocacy movements? This is also would be very interesting, I think, to look at from a university perspective. I think we are lacking data here. And we probably within the UNDP, working with both the ministries and the civil society and the judiciary and the private sector, we also have a role to play on strengthening the advocacy movement. Then there's also the COVID pandemic and of course the climate change again, where we have seen, and it's been evident for the government also of Ukraine, that a lot of people were left behind. Again, in the conflict affected areas, in the government controlled areas, and of course, in particular, not the non-government controlled areas, vulnerable rights holders, elderly, people with disability, but poor people in general have no internet access. They were not allowed freedom of movement, so they couldn't access their legal services, their pension schemes, etc. So these people were particularly vulnerable during the COVID pandemic. And I think this is an interesting lesson here where we had very close dialogue with the government and say, in building forward better, human rights and gender equality has to be at the center. Last week, I participated in a session at the Cabinet of Ministers, and where we launched 2 studies on digitalization. UNDP is also supporting the Ministry of Digitalization. It's what we call the DIA project, with basically awareness raising, capacity development, and ensuring Ukraine is moving forward, in particular in the governance sector, but also providing support, both central government, local government, but also, of course, working with civil society. This is a huge priority for the president and the government. And of course, Ukraine is to some extent a leading player when it comes to digitalization. What we see now is becoming an ICT hub in Europe. I think it's very important to explore how do we use this within the business and human rights scenario in Ukraine, because this is a tool to enhance transparency, combat corruption, and obviously also enhance accountability. So how do we work with the tech and digitalization here? This is very interesting, I think, for Ukraine, because you have a lot of talent. I know a lot of Western people I met, you know, over the past year, who's actually coming to Ukraine to work, IT expert from Denmark, my own country. So here we need to explore that. But again, here, coming back to the marginalization and why human rights is so important. Here we also found that the person with disability, the poor, the elders who have no smartphone or a poor internet connection have been left behind. So I think the lessons here for Ukraine is really good political will, but in terms of awareness raising, which Marina also said, and in terms of policy coherence, there's a lot of work ahead. There's a lot of work ahead for us in terms of getting much better data. And I see the universities and student here could play a very big role. Then, of course, UNDP is also working with resilience and economic recovery. And I think it's very important to look at the synergies between economy and human rights here in terms of, I mean, the fact in Ukraine, again, some statistics say that up to 30% of the workforce are employed in the informal sector. So how do we accelerate and work with these different sectors? We need to understand the different sectors and to understand the barriers, but also the uptake. And how do we make that demand that responsible business is a good business model, and so we can provide decent jobs, social protection, and get the tax revenue that the state is not getting. So making that triple win, if you like. This, I think, is a key role here. And I'm glad that I also have people within my office who knows about economic development. And we need to work very closely on these synergies on these issues. I think I probably took too much time. This was not my manuscript, but thanks for your question, and I hope I can talk.
Yes, thank you. And actually, it's a very good announcement. Our panel discussion tomorrow, we will talk about good business models and how actually to build such business models. And actually, we are open for your questions and comments. And I know that in this audience, we have, for example, famous Ukrainian practical lawyers who has actually business and human rights practice. Am I right, Artem?
If you don't mind, I'll answer in Ukrainian. Так, щодо
Well, yes, right. If we speak about use or dissemination of best practices for implementation of human rights in Ukraine, me as an alumni of the Academy of Law, and I'm grateful to you as one of lecturers within the Rule of Law program, well, I believe that it is important that dissemination, as Mr. Barabash mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, that this dissemination also happened horizontally. Based on my own experience of participation in several training programs, where there were simultaneously business representatives, law business representatives, representatives of public authorities, prosecutors, judges, and legal aid lawyers. So there, I believe it is important to expand this dialogue and to exchange ideas about human rights by their application by agents of the state, by representatives of businesses, via ongoing communication. And it is important to overcome some awkward or sensitive issues that hopefully we will discuss tomorrow based on the case. And there it will be possible to develop not only understanding of that human rights are currently not just a fashionable trend, but maybe the only viable model that in the future will contribute to development of our society and to more successful integration in the global and European family. Moreover, I believe that it is important that in this horizontal cooperation, in discussion of training, that we engage the future lawyers, students, or those who have graduated already, who have a higher university degree there, but who continue their training, advanced training process. So it's important that people who have already received the opportunity to have their legal practice, that they could also apply this knowledge in their practice, focused on the rule of law and respect.
назвати з того, що я бачу щодня, я не можу назвати ніякої царини, де дотримання верховенства права.
I cannot find any field where the rule of law, if complied with, would not be able to solve all the problems. So rule of law is a universal remedy for all the spheres. Maybe I will say some traditional things, but I think that the human rights can be regarded as the most adequate approach to resolving all legal problems in the modern Ukrainian society. Moreover, I've been working with big corporations. I've been trying to counteract these big corporations, so I know what I'm saying. Human rights in business would be a huge pillar supporting business and facilitating its further development. As we see today, business is getting more and more leverage to interact with the society, and responsible business or business responsibility in the field of human rights cannot always be ensured by the governmental enforcement or international enforcement. Responsible business, truly responsible business should focus on the protection of all kinds of rights, including the information rights. I think that such business would pose less threat for the humanity in future. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to say that today we've got also the representatives of economic schools, and in fact, I realize that we are hosted by the law university. There are lots of lawyers surrounding us, but in fact, it would be highly interesting to get the opinion from the economists. Please share your vision. Is there any space to incorporate this component into the curriculum of economic schools? And what components do your curricula include by now? Do you as professors feel this request, this demand? As a person who have been teaching at an economic school for a long time, I can say that business and human rights are totally different contexts. Actually, I specialize in socially responsible business and I started delving into business and human rights, but the understanding, to my understanding, the approach of economists and lawyers is completely different. Sometimes business believes that it's cheaper to pay the fine than to comply with this or that legislation. This is true for but in transnational corporations, the approach is totally different. The approach to contracts, for instance. At the moment, we are working together with the European Business Association. We communicate with transnational companies, and now I know that we have to use really plain language to articulate this need for the business to respect human rights. It is possible to articulate very clearly why business should not produce tobacco products or if it produces these products or other harmful products, then business should pay for kids' education, for instance, or something like that. But business understands this as some obligation. There is no deep understanding. There is no penetration of the human rights element into all spheres of business. As far as I know, business does not apply indicators to estimate its overall social impact. Therefore, this comprehensive approach is highly crucial today. Mr. Donets mentioned that the approaches should be combined. Indeed, business does not always understand how all this works. medium and big companies never study the judgments, the decisions made by the European Human Rights Court. That's true. Thank you very much. And Ms. Beata has a comment, I guess.
I just wanted to react very quickly about this translation of the language into very simple terms. So it's actually one of our projects at the moment at the Polish Institute for Human Rights. We are kind of just going right by right and kind of trying to explain on 2-3 pages what it means in business context, so that we just take a right, we have a very brief paragraph about what it means in kind of traditional state individual, but then we just kind of explain what does it mean in business context. And we provide a very brief positive example, like company X has fired a trade unionist and blah, blah, blah. And so we kind of, and what it should be done, right? So we have a positive, negative case, and we have how a process should look like from UNGP point of view. So kind of how to mitigate or how to prevent. And we are just starting with this campaign. It will go for several months. It's kind of one right at a time so that people have actually time to read it at work. So hopefully this understanding of what those individual rights mean in business contexts, hopefully it will increase. And if we get some funding, we'll be trying to translate it also into other languages because it's needed. It's just really needed. And also about talking about companies kind of being more willing to actually pay the cost of the fines and to change. We found that slowly there is more pressure from investors who started to realize that companies not respecting human rights actually means increasing their operational costs. And I was surprised to see some of the Polish companies actually reacting to how they were ranked on the corporate human rights benchmark, on the corporate human index. And when they've realized how low they are compared to their competitors, it kind of drove, okay, perhaps we should do something, because in a moment, if we want to attract credits, we'll have to pay more than our competition to get these credits, which kind of will affect our kind of competitive edge. So it kind of slowly everything starts to fall together into one nice kind of puzzle picture. And what I found, it helps to talk to companies not so much about what they will gain. We don't know really if if their profits will grow. But if you talk to them and show, well, listen, have you calculated how much it costs you to pay for the legal representation in the labor law courts? Have you calculated the cost of insurance, or have you calculated how much it costed you to kind of stop the production because you had an accident and you had to wait for half a day for police to arrive and another half a day? So you kind of had to halt production for the whole day. How much did it cost you? And if you kind of make this connection between the human rights impact on individual people who got hurt, and you kind of show, and this is what it costed you to halt production for a day because you didn't pay for one small protection mechanism. Well, maybe you better should invest into this health and safety, because if you'll get more of those kind of stoppages, more of those breaks in production, it will actually cost you more than what you would have spent on those protection mechanisms. So sometimes talking the language of costs could be more effective. And I think just going back to the beginnings, I think it would be extremely helpful to have just basic human rights course actually integrated into the teaching at the universities, also at the economic schools. Kind of obviously with a twist on this business and human rights approach, rather than kind of just learn all the treaties and what different cases said. But I think it would be extremely helpful in getting people start to think about it when they go through their studies, particularly economic studies. I mean, not only because it's cross-disciplinary, but yeah, thank you.
Can I add to this? So first of all, I think Beata set out really well the business case for human rights. And there is a business case for human rights. I'm not going to go into it because I'm not a big believer that we have to convince businesses to respect human rights. I think that is a mission, that is a process that we have to undertake, but it's part of a larger conversation about what do we want from our society as a whole. that needs to take place. But you went beyond the business case. I'm not trying, but within that was embedded. We are on the same team here. But I think that there's a lot that can be done in terms of practical conversations. I teach within law a module or a class on business and human rights that has commercial lawyers and human rights lawyers in the same room. It's fascinating. And one of my favorite things to do every year is to sort of start by assessing how they feel about businesses' responsibility for human rights and where we are from that. And the human rights people are always like, obviously businesses have a lot of responsibility and we should hold them accountable and prosecute them at the International Criminal Court when they do bad. And the commercial lawyers are like, no. By the end of the 10-week program, inevitably, those sides have almost flipped a little bit. They've mostly met in the middle, but the commercial lawyers are the ones who are actually pushing for greater regulation. The commercial lawyers are the ones saying, actually, we want clearer rules for businesses. And once you start that conversation, we then try to expand it out and bring the business students into conversation and our economic students into conversation with our human rights students and our commercial law students to get that interdisciplinary discussion going around as to what the structural barriers are, and also what is it that we share as a vision for what our society should look like? What does it mean to have an economy that reflects our communal values rather than simply reflecting economic principles or simply reflecting the standard expectation of what a corporation's responsibility is, which is to its shareholders to value profit. What does it mean to go beyond that and really think about our community? And I think that's where, as educators, we should start the conversation with our students. And when they leave us, some of them will become evil corporate lawyers and evil corporate actors, right? Like, and I don't mean all actors in corporations are evil. I mean, some of them will become evil people who do that stuff because that's just the nature of statistics of human beings. But a lot of them will end up having those conversations in the communities and in the businesses that they work in. And so I've seen my students from the commercial law background go into corporations and transform the corporations from within inside because they had those foundational conversations about what does it mean to have a society that we all want to be a part of and a society that's built on our foundational values. So that's where I would start the conversation with our students is what do you value and what would this look like? And from that, build on that.
Thank you, Tara. And Dirk has a comment, and then Nikolai has as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that because I was going to go a little bit in the same direction of saying that the business case for human rights, I find it very limiting. It's something that usually gets the attention of businesses somewhere, but as you already pointed out, not all of the arguments may work. It depends really on the local context. The discussions that we've been having between us in the last days when we were here about this topic in Ukraine is really, for me, the recurring question always is, what's the hook? What is the hook that how do you get the attention of a Ukrainian company? Is it really what we are usually doing, coming in saying, oh, investors care more about human rights now? Well, do they really? There's tons of evidence that they don't really, they do it in a checklist approach. There's tons, and then the Ukrainian company may say, I don't need an investor. I'm a Ukrainian company, I get my money from the Ukrainian bank. They don't really care about this topic yet. So that's not the hook for them, but then what is the hook? In Europe, you can say, oh, there's changing legislation on the horizon. This actually gets lawyers inside a company into the same room as the sustainability department or the CSR department or whatever you want to call it. That's new. That's a new development, and it's a little bit similar to what you just described, the atmosphere in the classroom being. But I think this is why it's so important to already bring this in at the university level, because that context-specific knowledge of what are the hooks in your context, what works as an argument to argue for human rights, is really important to figure out for each context specifically, because human rights is not good for business across the board. It's simply not true. It is true sometimes, and sometimes it's easy, but it's not true across the board. And anyone who tells you differently is just fooling yourself that you can get there eventually by trusting that businesses will see the light. I think it's also really important that we are working on the regulation side and on the government side, that governments do also their part in giving rules to businesses that they can then follow, because that's how practice changes the fastest, I think. So yeah, that's just.
Thank you. And we have just 2 minutes and need to go to the next session. So Nikolai, please, your comment.
Okay, just a few reflections. I think the hook in Ukraine, I would focus on really the practice and not just the principles and the theories. We can talk endlessly about the different principles and the guiding principles, but at the end of the day, I think the students and the academics needs to understand and unfold the principles into practice. That was my first point. The second point is in Ukraine, you have 90% of the export is going to the EU. You have the EU Approximation Agreement, which refers to human rights, social protection, business and human rights, right, left and center. You have now a mandatory human rights due diligence law coming up. So I think we have really an argument and a hook here to say, okay, there's an interest. If 90% of the export is for the EU, there is an interest here. So we really need to identify and help the businesses, including the SMEs, and be strategic. There will be oligarchs who will earn much more on not following this, and they will pay the fine also in Denmark. They all do that, even if they say that they're here to guiding principles or the SDGs. Don't quote me. But basically, we need this mandatory framework, but we need to help them, and we need to make the business model so they can see they can earn the money. I think this was my final comments. Yeah, I could go on. But
Thank you very much. And very last comment from Beata.
Thank you, Elena. And I just literally a couple of sentences just to say that if we subscribe what was said, but at the moment, for example, in Poland, it's a business case that is the driving element. And it's really important for everybody to, as was said, recognize what is the hook for companies in your society. And also Taras has said something very important. What are the values of our societies? And it's not enough to talk only at the universities. We really need to get out with this discussion into the society. What we've tried to do in Poland, we've organized a series of discussions with random people in different cities with different political affiliation of their presidents to see how the discussions around the question, should there be an import ban on products that are affected by child labor and forced labor? Should such ban be introduced in Poland? It was fascinating to hear the discussions among people because everybody was absolutely on the same page. Everybody was believing that yes, it's wrong to have child labor. Yes, it's wrong to have forced labor. But when it came to the discussions around, shall we have such law making such ban? The discussions were different because they were evolving around, would it be enforceable? Would kind of people feel that they don't have to be careful about their shopping choices if they know that there is such a law? But there was a whole discussion, and we need to have more of this discussion in our public sphere. So I would say it's also extremely important to get media engaged. And this is something that, at least in Poland, we have failed to do. I mean, we did manage to kind of get articles on business and human rights into some newspapers on annual basis. We've managed to get with some individual pieces on forced labor to some professional magazines on personal and management, but it's not in the mainstream media. And we really need to get there. We really need to get our societies talking about what's important for our societies. And it's very difficult. So if anybody has an idea, please pursue it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all our panelists of this session. It was a really great session, very inspiring. Я перейду на українську, поки я буду
Now
анонсувати.
let me switch into Ukrainian while I'll be announcing the next session. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Bogdan Karnaukh, the moderator of the next session, to come up to the stage. He's got the experience of cooperation with Oxford University. publishing papers on business and human rights. Anthony Ewing will be another panelist. He will share his experience of teaching at Columbian Law School. Mr. Anthony is the co-chair of Teaching and Human and Business Rights Forum. And of course, you will learn a lot of other interesting things from Mr. Ewing. My good friend, Miss Daniela Pamplona from Brazil, who is the co-chair of a regional association, Latin American Association for Business and Human Rights. She is also running the course for business human rights at her university. She will share her experience. And Mr. Yerny Letna-Chernich has worked as a trainer for human business rights. Then Miss Ashley Reynolds. This is the graduate of the Danish Human Rights Institute. At the moment, she cooperates with another really powerful organization, Business and Human Rights Resource Center. She will tell you more about the career in the field of business and human rights. And of course, we're inviting Ms. Ekaterina Dekalo. She's the author of Business and Human Rights course in Belarus. She'll also share her experience. So I'm wishing you a very productive discussion. Thank you. Thank you, Lena. First, I'm considering which language I should use to moderate. What is the proportion of English-speaking and Ukrainian-speaking participants? Maybe the interpretation is available, right?
So I guess I could speak in English if we all have the translator. So it's a great honor for me to be here. And I would not consider myself as an expert on business and human rights, in fact. I would rather say that I am a new kid on the block, thanks to our founding mother of the business and human rights approach in Ukraine, Olena. And so I would say she enrolled me a couple of years ago. And it's a great honor for me to be here. And I will not ask our participants any particular questions. I encourage everyone to talk about everything they think is important for teaching business and human rights. However, from a teaching perspective, from a lecturer perspective, I guess we have a couple of key points we have to address here. And if you please, you could address those issues. So I think that the first thing we should consider is what is the scale we are dealing with. So should we deliver just one course on business and human rights, or should we maybe be the whole master program? That is the first question. The next one depends on the first. How do we structure this material? And if we deal with the whole master degree program, so we have to consider what courses will be included there. And if we say that we should confine ourselves only to one particular course delivered maybe to everyone on master programs, so what topics should be covered in there? So that is like the first major problem of the scale and structuring the material for delivering to our students. The second thing I think is who should be teaching that course? Because as was said already, it's quite an interdisciplinary problem, and we cover environmental law, labor law, tort law, contract law. So who do you believe from the professors of the mentioned disciplines is best suited to teach business and human rights. And also, I am very interested in knowing where do each of you come from. As for me, I have an expertise in tort law, and due to Olena, as I've said already, I was taught by her, thanks Olena, to take a new approach to the problems of tort law, and especially I try to look now on a tort law as a way to remedy human rights, business-related human rights violations. So the second issue is who should be teaching. So is it a professor of corporate law, civil law, public law, etc. And also one major issue is also who we see as the end product of our education. I mean, should be a corporate lawyer who helps the company to develop due diligence practices, or should it be a human rights defender, or should it be the worker of the government who develops the legislational framework? And these three are kind of persons. They correlate, I guess, with three pillars. If we focus on one on another, then we have one on another end product. And again, I guess the last but not least question is the methodology. What methodological issues we should cover? What methods of delivering material are best suited for this discipline? Case method or gamification of the educational process or whatsoever. However, those, I just outlined some major points, but you are welcome to address them or to focus on whatever you want. And we will start with Anthony Irving. I hope he is with us via video conference. Anthony, I hope you see us. Hello.
I do see you. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, yes, we do.
Wonderful. So first of all, thank you so much to the organizers of the conference and to Professor Uvarova for inviting me. I'm thrilled to participate from just outside New York City. I'm sorry that I can't join you in person in Ukraine, but hopefully on another occasion. I'll do my best, and hopefully I'll touch on some of those questions from the moderator. Thank you for those. So I have taught business and human rights as an adjunct professor at Columbia Law School, where I did my legal training since 2001. So for some 20 years now. And when I first started teaching, I've taught the course. It was jointly listed at the business school and the law school. Subsequently, it's been at the law school for many years. So I've been teaching the subject for quite a while. After 10 years of teaching, around the time that the UN Guiding Principles were adopted in 2011 with a colleague at Columbia, Joanne Bauer, I co-founded the Teaching Business and Human Rights Forum, which is a network for individuals teaching business and human rights worldwide to provide a platform for collaboration. And over the course of the past 20 years, BHR teaching has really evolved alongside the development and the maturation of the field of business and human rights as a field of study and, importantly, a field of practice. So let me talk a little bit about the evolution of BHR courses and teaching. And then maybe if there's time, I'll talk about sort of looking forward and how the global BHR community can support local efforts. So BHR teaching, over the past 20 years, the demand for BHR education has grown exponentially, and teaching has followed. Through membership in the Teaching and Business and Human Rights Forum, I can say that there are over 350 individuals teaching the subject in some form at more than 200 institutions in 45 countries. More than 100 universities worldwide have added the subject of business and human rights to their curricula in the past decade alone. And I'm pleased to say that since 2018, it's been in the curricula of the National Law University in Kharkiv, thanks to Professor Uvarova, which is a wonderful development. And we're increasingly seeing the launch of new courses and inclusion of BHR in curricula worldwide, locally. BHR courses, as we've heard from the first session, are by definition unique. They are multidisciplinary. They draw on law, business, economics, accounting. There are even now business and human rights courses in schools of engineering. And it can draw on many different disciplines, so it's not limited to one traditional academic discipline. As the moderator noted, a challenge always, once you can get a course into the curriculum, challenges include what to cover and how to teach it. By definition, typically the first BHR offering in a curricula is an introductory course. My syllabus, for example, for many years, I've taught an introductory course to law students with a strong component of international law students pursuing their LLM degrees at Columbia Law School in New York. And I try to cover, there are no prerequisites for the introductory course, first of all, because I want to introduce the subject to as many people as possible. So I don't want to restrict access to the course. And we seek to introduce students to international human rights standards and the UN guiding principles, survey tools to hold corporations accountable, and introduce students to corporate best practice. This latter area of corporate best practice is what has really exploded in terms of providing opportunities for teaching, for case studies, for materials over the past 10 years. My goals in the course are for students to understand the relevance of international standards for business enterprises, to understand the practical implications for business managers of the corporate responsibility to respect human rights, to provide students with the language and tools to advise both companies and to advocate against companies and to advise policymakers. So to the moderator's question, who makes up the audience? My answer is all of the above. My goal is to equip students to be effective business and human rights advisors to the private sector or to nonprofits and human rights advocates or to government actors. We consider how companies can best address their human rights impacts. And finally, we focus on what doesn't get enough attention, what remedies are available for victims of human rights impacts connected to business activity. That is the content of the intro course. As demand for business and human rights education has increased, as the field has matured, we're now at a point, certainly in the US and Western Europe, where there are too many topics and too many teaching resources to cover every relevant topic in an introductory course. So we're now at the point where in the evolution of the discipline, where a comprehensive BHR curriculum could include an introductory course covering core topics, more advanced and detailed coursework on specific topics, as well as clinical offerings that apply that practical approach to the conceptual principles and that emphasize experiential learning. So 3 years ago, I started teaching a slightly advanced course. I call it Managing Human Rights. There is a prerequisite. It requires students to have had some either coursework exposure to the field, or increasingly with my international law students, students are coming to do their LLM already having worked on some element of business and human rights as professionals, as lawyers, as advisors within multilateral institutions. And that allows us to go into more detail on particular topics, whether it be a deep dive on a particular sector, the tech sector, or the right to food, or what have you, and to go in more detail to practical application. As courses and course content have evolved, so have teaching approaches. Of course, methods for teaching BHR topics are as diverse as the individuals teaching the subject and the students studying it. However, the subject matter, particularly because it's multi and interdisciplinary, allows for creative pedagogy. Many instructors are experimenting with alternatives to traditional lectures and classroom discussion, such as simulations, role-playing exercises, debates, clinical work, and online courses. Role-playing exercises and simulations I have found to be particularly effective. And to the point from the last session about the need to focus on the practical or integrate the concepts into practical application by putting students into classroom scenarios where they're playing the roles of making the human rights case to a board of directors, or navigating a particular human rights due diligence or human rights impact assessment issue for a particular sector, and putting them in specific roles, anticipating how they might advise their clients or their employers in the future, really can make the practical aspects manifest, and is a wonderful hook to interest and engage students. And to that end, the teaching forum that I co-founded and currently serve on the governance committee for attempts to provide resources for individuals teaching business and human rights worldwide. And the common denominator is teaching business and human rights, irrespective of faculty. There are individuals teaching at law schools, teaching at business schools, teaching accounting, teaching engineering, and there are full-time professors and a lot of individuals like myself who are not full-time professors, but who are practitioners who also teach. So to the question, who should teach business and human rights, I also answer all of the above. And bringing practitioners into the classroom is particularly effective. And I'll just mention and close the first segment, mention some of the resources available through the teaching forum. They include a discussion board for individuals to collaborate, a syllabi bank where individuals can share syllabi and curricula, in-person teaching workshops, and increasingly during the pandemic, virtual webinars, as well as a public online teaching BHR handbook with notes on particular topics and advice for teachers on how to integrate particular topics into their curricula. So let me stop there, and perhaps later in the session I can come back to looking forward and how the global BHR community can assist and promote business and human rights education locally.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Evening. And I cannot stand not to advertise what Mr. Evening was mentioning is the syllabus, which was developed by our professors of our university. Some of them are here. Olena Uvarova, Yulia Razmitaeva is here also, and Katerina Buryakovska. And Beata Franchik, of course, also here as leading developer of the course. So thank you. It was very interesting, especially about the statistics, and thank you for the very detailed description of the topics covered by the introductory course. And the next speaker is Daniela Anna Pomplona. Please, you are welcome to cover any issues you would like to.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'd first like to thank Professor Olena for inviting me to be here with you again on this forum. Let me just say that it's an honor to be here with my colleagues. And I do have to mention that I'm feeling quite jealous for my friends Tara, Ekaterina, Beata, Yernis, who could travel to Ukraine, and I'm just hoping that Elena will invite me again next year when the travel conditions are better and I can hopefully join you there in person. So I do want to share with you my screen, and I have some bullet points I'd like to share with you. So I'm going to be talking about teaching business and human rights in Brazil, and hopefully I'll also address some of the questions that our the president of this roundtable has made. I'd like to start telling you that human rights is not a mandatory issue, a mandatory course in Brazil, in law schools. So it is, what the legislation say is that it has to be as a cross-cutting issue. And normally we will find it in constitutional law courses. So that's why it's really hard to find professors that will be talking about business and human rights for undergraduates. So what I have done is just search for what is happening in Brazil on graduate programs. And in Brazil, we do have a way of scoring the graduate programs, and they go from 1 to 7. And for you to be open, you have to be at least 3. And we do not have a number 7 in business or law. They need to be fully internationalized course programs, and this is not happening here. But we do have, like, the best scores we have, it's 5 and 6. So I'm giving you a picture here. We have 119 business programs in Brazil, and 25 of them have a score 5 and 4 are score 6. And we do have 111 law graduate programs in Brazil, and 12 have a score 5 and 11 will have a score 6. Well, I also like to show you how they are divided in Brazil to make my point later. So here you see the law graduate programs, and the orange and the blue part of this map are the richest parts, the richest regions in Brazil. And of course, where we have most of the population, the concentration of the population. So you see, among the courses with the best scores, they are really concentrated in these 2 regions. It is hard then to bring the discussion, if we find the discussion about business and human rights, which we're going to see in a minute. If we find it here, it's really hard to bring them to the other parts of the country. And it's really, it's a real challenge, because most of the violations that will be brought by corporations will be in the other parts of the countries. So it's a really complex issue that we have to tackle. Although COVID has been teaching us that it is possible to connect and to exchange with professors and students in other regions, it is still really hard. And you know that it's so much better when we can interact personally at least once in a while. If we take a look at the business programs, you'll see that, again, we have a concentration of these programs in the 2 most, the richest regions in the country. So this is telling, because the green region in the map is the Amazon region. And as you can see, we do not have any business programs there. So I was looking at the business and the law programs, because this is where we will most likely find any discussions related to business and human rights in the country, okay? Of course, I was then looking for how would I be able to tell you that business and human rights is an issue in our schools. So I was searching for any term that could lead me to business and human rights. And we can find in the syllabi, the UNGPs, we can find the treaty process, but mostly we will find issues around sustainability or social environmental rights. Reading the syllabi, we can conclude that they are touching the issues of business and human rights, but most of them will not directly relate to it. It's just like there are lots of professors that are building a syllabi and they are touching the issue, but they do not really locate the content that they're teaching into business and human rights. So among the law programs with a score 6, only in 4 of them we would find any topic related to business and human rights. And among the ones that have a score of 5, we will only find 2 terms that will be related to the issue. And the ones who specifically will talk about business and human rights will be only 2 of these graduate programs. So this was just actually tell us how we still have to develop a lot in the country regarding to teaching business and human rights. And if we take a look here, I just brought 2 examples so you understand how these things will come up in different syllabi. This is a syllabi on a course named Human Rights and Transnational Corporations, interdisciplinary topics on environment, health, decent work, and the global migration crisis. So, of course, it will talk about the obligations of transnational corporations regarding those rights. And it will mention the fact that we do have to be aware of the production chains and how they relate to human rights abuses. So we can conclude it is talking about the issue, though it's not using the term business and human rights. But this is an example of a very direct syllabi. And we can also see here another one. It's a course named International Trade and Foreign Investment Regulations. And this, I just took this small part of the syllabi that will say that the course also discusses the increasing focus on investor responsibility in the areas of human rights and labor and environmental standards. So this is just for us to have an idea of how this will appear on the courses. If we take a look at the business schools, while we will have some syllabi talking about sustainability, some of them talking about consumer law, and none of them will talk about business and human rights. We will find corporate social responsibility. We will not even find responsible business conduct, but we do understand if we read the whole syllabi that they're talking about corporate social responsibilities at some point in the course. Well, this does not really mean that we are not tackling the issue of business and human rights here. It just means that we are not really putting this inside the box of business and human rights. But I'll come to this later. I just want to tell you that there is another way of teaching business and human rights, and this is through the human rights clinics. So here you have the number of, well, we do have a bigger number of legal clinics in the country. Not that bigger, but it's bigger. But this is the numbers regarding the human rights clinics. And as you can see, now we can actually see something going on some regions of the country where we wouldn't see any information regarding business and human rights on the graduate programs. So it's also important to understand that these human rights clinics, they are all connected, not to the graduate programs, but to the undergraduate programs. And it's striking that you will probably have a much harder time to be talking to undergrads about business and human rights if you are inside a regular classroom, but you will also probably have a much rewarding time if you do have the time and you do have the organization to talk to them about the issue in a human rights clinics. So as you can see here, for instance, in the green part, we have 4 human rights clinics, and by the name of the clinics and by the description that they give to themselves, we can see that they are talking about human rights in general. They are talking about land issues, indigenous rights, social environmental rights, and migrants. So of course that all these subject issues can touch business and human rights depending on how you're seeing, from which perspective you're seeing this, and of course, what is the case that you have in your hands. And regarding how the legal clinics would actually bring the subject to the students, most of them will work with Amici Curi. We have many of the clinics that will be producing those papers, or the students will be producing those papers under the supervision of the coordinators. And the methodology that is being used is a very specific one that will actually make the students really put their hands on the issue. So they build by themselves the text, and I wish we will have a bit more of time to talk about that. Some of the legal clinics that are tackling human rights issues, they also engage in strategic lawsuits, and some of them will actually give direct help to communities. Well, this is actually another way of teaching business and human rights, and none of them will actually speak about business and human rights directly. But of course, we do have so many cases around the country that touch specifically the issue, that whenever the human rights clinics are around the case and working with this case, this is what they're really talking about. And just to give you some final remarks, I want to share with you some weak points and of course some strong points of what we see when you take a look at this big picture of how graduates and undergrads are being exposed to business and human rights. So I need to tell you that the doctrine that we use, it is still really dependent on the English language. So this is a huge downside. Okay, well, there are lots of people who speak English in the country, and I could say that now for all Latin America, but still reading academic papers, it's a whole different thing. And here in Brazil, we are the only country that speaks Portuguese in Latin America. So we also have some important doctrine in Spanish, but it's a smaller issue, but it's still the issue. So regarding of the point of view of doctrine, we do have, this is a hurdle for us. While case studies are really relevant for us, this is actually how we can bring our ideas and even the imagination that Tara was talking to us before. This is where our students help translate the things that they learn, the background that they have, into solutions for the issues that they are, seeing when they actually get the chance to work with a case. So this is a chance for us to use our domestic material and where we can hopefully make some contributions to the fields. Well, we still don't have an app in Brazil, and I think this is a hurdle, and I would expect that we will talk about the subject much more. The subject will get much more attention from academics when we do publish one, if we do. Again, we do have really important research being produced here because we are tackling the cases, the real cases, things that are happening on the ground. But it would be nice to start to fit all these cases into the business and human rights agenda. And I also want to mention that ESG, it's now a very strong brand. So this is popping up everywhere for graduates and mostly in professional courses. So I think this is something.
I am terribly sorry to interrupt you.
I'm sorry. Okay. In one sentence, sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't paying attention to my time. But just to finish then, ESG might be one of the entry points for us here in Latin America because it's being talked about a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So it was very interesting to learn how the teaching methods and the teaching programs are dependent on the social welfare of the region, even within a separate country. So our next speaker is Jernej Letnar-Černić from Slovenia. And Jernej, you have lots of experience in training business and human rights in different regions. So maybe you could tell us about how the syllabuses are different. Do we have to take into consideration the characteristics of the region, or are the skills are universal and can be universally taught? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here in Kharkiv, to see all of you and my long-lasting friends, also in person. It's good to be here. Also, it's good to be here at the event which is taking place in Central Eastern Europe, in Kharkiv, and I hope that business human rights, also with this event and the Ljubljana workshop, which is taking place in a week, is it's gaining momentum, and that we can all build on this momentum. Of course, when we are talking about teaching business human rights in Central Eastern Europe, if you allow me, I would concentrate on the region we are in. We have to know that business human rights in this region is some kind of forgotten topic. It's not a topic which is, as Beata mentioned earlier, which would make a headlines of a newspaper or TV shows. It's a topic which is in this region very much convoluted with corporate social responsibility. And this also explains why teaching business human rights in this region it's not a rule. I would say it's an exception. Perhaps, as Anthony said, business human rights is maturing in Western Europe, Northern America. That might be the case. But here in this region, it's a far from obvious topic to teach. And I'll give you some data which I gathered throughout the years, and also on the basis of study which we are now conducting with Beata and Olena, mapping the business human rights in Central and Eastern Europe, but also from my personal experience teaching in this region. Now, if you ask me how many countries have a separate individual courses on business human rights, they are public or private universities. Well, very few, and this country, Ukraine, is one of the best practices in this regard. This university, but also Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, they have separate courses on business and human rights, but it's an exception. The only country which I really know in this region which has a course on business human rights is Latvia. At Riga Graduate School of Law, there is a master course, elective course on business and human rights. In other countries, like including my own Slovenia, business human rights, not only it's a part of compulsory courses, not even it's a part of selective courses. If you ask my colleagues whether they teach these topics, whether companies have obligations, do they perform due diligence, and so on, they would say, well, we teach it through our our existing courses, like accounting, reporting at the economics faculty, or for example, constitutional law class, the law schools, and so on. So it's a part of existing courses, but of course, most of the people who work in this area, they're not experts in this topic. So I mean, if you compare U.S. business schools, U.S. law schools, or if you compare with Essex human rights projects and our reality here in Central and Eastern Europe, we are oceans apart. So we have to admit it. Apart from that, there are a number of short courses, summer courses, workshops, which are taking place. And this is a good practice of this region. Particularly in Western Balkans, there are several courses on business human rights taking place within the framework of summer schools or workshops or tailored courses for practitioners. This is even more so in those countries in this region which are part of the EU. Why is that? Well, as you know, some of you would know, in the recent years, the EU has adopted binding acts in some parts of business human rights, non-financial reporting, and also the recent regulation which started to apply this year on conflict diamonds. So in countries such as Slovenia, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, you would find, especially tailored courses for companies, aimed at companies in order to raise awareness of their obligations they have concerning the reporting, their annual reports. So there are courses in this regard. Now, if I come back to your question as to the content, what should we teach in business human rights courses in this region? Well, how we teach business human rights, or how should we teach business human rights in Central Europe, at least in my opinion, differs from what or how business human rights is being taught at schools in Northern Europe or US law schools or business schools. Why is that? Well, because of particularities of our region, because of particularities of our historic experiences, historic legacy. We all know that in our region, state is very much present in private sector. So it's very much, the whole discussion is very much connected with the obligations of state to protect human rights through the state-owned enterprises. Then, of course, there is a general issue, how can we teach properly business human rights in our region if the basic standards of human rights and rule of law have not been fully internalized? And the mentality is sometimes still, that of old boys networks, old elites. I'm talking about, weak institutions, weak rule of law, many judgments which all our countries have before the European Court of Human Rights. So when we teach business human rights, we have to teach it together with daily realities of rule of law in Central and Eastern Europe. We have to teach it together with the obligations of states to protect human rights. Then lastly, the question was who should teach it? Well, I think the answer is quite simple. Anybody who has experience in business human rights and has integrity. So a person who teaches business human rights has to have integrity. Cannot be a person who has been involved in, business fraud or, have been convicted or has any other, dark chapter in his past, and so on. So it should be a person who has integrity. So overall, mapping, teaching business human rights in our region, it's a work in progress. It's a work in progress, and all of us who are here, we are working towards that we try to internalize these basic standards concerning business human rights and also rule of law. But then, of course, there also has to be commitment on the part of universities, companies, and other stakeholders. It's not very helpful when one talks with a businessman from one big state-owned company and he starts to brag how his company has a a policy on corporate social responsibility and so on. And we know that there are many reports how that state-owned company has been involved in violations and so on. And there are many examples of that from our own national environment. So we need really commitment. Of course, we need also push. And we also need like help from the outside. And this is very important to emphasize here the work which Anthony Ewing has been doing with his colleagues, Danish Institute for Human Rights, other foreign donors. It's really important to push for the change, to bring about the change, and for companies who work in this region and who want to be present at EU market, for example, they have to pay attention that all these global supply chains, either in Ukraine or Slovenia or Croatia, now they are part of this business and human rights network, which is becoming binding and more binding and binding, and also local domestic companies have to comply with non-financial reporting, due diligence requirement, and what is very important, enabling access to justice for rights holders, for victims. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And I totally agree with you that here in Ukraine, and I guess in Eastern Europe in general, we put very much emphasis on the obligations of the state and on the legislation. And in order to provide some better practices, we do need some boost from the legislator. Without that, hardly anything could happen. Thank you. And so our next speaker is Ashley Nancy Reynolds, Research Assistant, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Business and Human Rights Resource Center. Ms. Reynolds, maybe you recall how you got involved into this, and from where do you come from which area of the law? Thank you.
The answer is that I don't come from the law or from economics. I studied global studies with a focus on international development, but the other topic that I studied was professional writing, where I learned how to communicate very difficult topics like the ones that we're talking about today in a more accessible way. And this became a huge passion of how can we take this super complicated legal concept and make it understandable to just a normal person who might have been affected by a business. I went on after that to study conflict. I studied human rights. And as I was thinking about international development, I kept seeing that things were privatized and being increasingly handed over to businesses, but then the businesses don't understand how to respect human rights. And the point of development is to improve human lives in real terms. So that led me to the question of who is this development for? And all of these questions led me in a very indirect, roundabout way to business and human rights. Everything connects back to this. So I joined this region. I'm still very new to Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia as well. So I appreciate you allowing me here to learn from all of you. At last year's UN forum, there were a lot of needs identified. And one of the biggest ones was that there are a lot of people already working on business and human rights in this region. It's not completely devoid of business and human rights, but they don't always come from a business and human rights framework. We work a lot with environmental NGOs and nonprofits that are helping communities that are affected by businesses, but they don't think of this as a business and human rights issue necessarily. Another need that was identified during last year's forum was a need to collaborate and partner with one another, and there really wasn't a space to do that. There's also a need for a wide spectrum of information, very introductory information for people not from a business and human rights background, as well as very region-specific information, because for a lot of people, there's a perception that this is only a Western Europe issue, which is not true. So we also need more very local specific knowledge, very specialized information and guidance. So there's a lot of different agendas, a lot of different viewpoints, and a lot of different needs. So we can collaborate, but we need to learn how we can meet one another and learn how to speak to one another. So I'm really excited to announce to all of you today that we've formed partnerships with a few different organizations here, and we have created the Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia Resource Hub on Business and Human Rights. And what this is a collaborative space that provides very introductory level information, including an e-learning on an introduction to business and human rights, alongside region-specific information, very topic in-depth guidance. And this is a space that anyone can join and contribute to. So we've already had some test users, including Ihor over there, contributed a post on due diligence in Ukraine. We've had a young woman in Bulgaria sharing her experience with workplace sexual harassment and how do we address gender issues. So this is a space that allows for a wide spectrum of agendas, a wide spectrum of collaboration, and a space to share stories about what works. Who is trying to access remedy? Is it working for them? What are the problems in this region that have prevented them effectively from doing this? Not just on a conceptual level, but in a very real, practical, this is how this has happened to me in my life level. So that question of who should be teaching, and not only that, but who should be a student, it's everybody. Everybody has a space on this platform to share their experience and to read the experiences of others. The structure follows the UN guiding principles with pages for each country in this region, as well as some very specialized topics, including conflict. So we would like to invite everybody participating today to become an early user on this platform. We are still rolling out the Russian version. We are still adding new features, but we want to open this up now to everybody to learn, and this hub is here for you. So I can disseminate the link to that later on, but yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what everything you have to say, and if there's anything that you want to see that's not already there, I'm here to listen. Beata is a partner, Elena is a partner, and we have a lot of support from my organization, the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, directing the project, and from the Danish Institute for Human Rights, advising us and providing us with resources. So we're looking to add more partners, more users, and make this really a useful space for you. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Our next speaker is Ekaterina Beikalo from Belarus, and I'm very interested because I believe we do have a lot in common, Ukraine and Belarus, and maybe not so good things, but we do have, yeah, in particular the socialist heritage, but I believe we will overcome it totally eventually. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here in person finally, and meet my virtual colleagues finally in person as well. So as for my experience, actually, I'm representing now, as I'm indicated in this program, as expert of Belarusian Helsinki Committee, but actually in my last development in life, so I moved professionally to the NGO sector, but before I have big academic background, and I have working for almost 14 years in Belarusian State University, and 6 of them I was the head of international law chair. So my background is international law, and actually my teaching experience of in business and human rights sphere connected very much with my practical experience in this year, because I was developing my courses. I will say now what these courses, but I was developing them in parallel with working with Belarusian Helsinki Committee as an expert. We were working on country guide on business and human rights for business, government, and civil society, and we were. Talking to Belarusian business and to get an experience, to understand what they think about this and how we should push this topic in our country. And without that practical experience, I wouldn't I wouldn't develop such courses as I developed them. No way. I mean, this practical experience gave me a lot, and this parallel work on teaching of these courses, academical such experience, and my practical experience did a lot for the quality of these courses. Because coming back to the what was Tara and Beata saying about business case in human rights. Yes, in post-Soviet countries, you cannot push this topic without business case and human rights, because you come to this answer very quickly, to this, I mean, to this thesis very quickly, just after one question from business community to you. Listen, everything is very nice that you are saying, but tell me, why should I do this if I can perfectly do my business without this? And you like, oh, it's like, really, why? Yeah, but okay, you started to explain that there is a legislation frame and so on and so forth, but again, it's not a secret that we have, I mean, in the countries with a less rule of law, with a very poor rule of law and not working institutions, so this all good governance, what we call good governance, there is, I mean, in Belarus, it's a 0 level. Now I'm just not talking, but so there is not less, there is no rule of law. There is rule of unlaw. I don't know how to say. And so you understand just that it's not the answer also can be in some cases about law, because they, okay, law, so there are a lot of laws and we are doing our business. Somehow we have to somehow, you know, somehow to deal with them. And in, you know, like, at least we can include these possible fines and something in our system of risks, in our risk management. We can just put in advance this money that we could that we have to pay if we violate something, and you just don't know what to say. And that's why it's very important in general, I think, that, I mean, we started in my curriculum and our practical work, we have started with answering question and with developing analytical paper on the question, why does business need human rights? And in general, I think that if you want to convince somebody to do something, you can come to him and speak to him why he could do this, what can force him to do this. Of course, it doesn't mean that there is no legislative frame and so on, but I think that much more sustainable development of all this movement on business and human rights will be if we will not rely only on legal frame, and we will try to convince business, I mean, show that human rights is a good economical instrument to develop your business. It does not mean that we less values of human rights. It means just that we shows human rights with the other side. So, and I have developed 2 curriculum in master program. Actually, I think that to teach business and human rights course, I would teach them only starting with a master level, because it's very, it demands at least basic knowledges of something. I mean, of law, of economy, it demands bachelor level, because it's very complicated and complex and interdisciplinary and philosophically actually as well, because it connected very much with social processes, especially in our region. So I developed 2 curriculum, one for international law, for master program on international law, and another one on master program in international economy. And actually in international law, it was a compulsory course. I used my administrative resource because I was a head of department and I made it I developed the plan for master program and they made it compulsory. But for economy, it was another department, so I could do only optional. It's very pity, but they didn't choose it no one time, economists. It's also very, it's indicator. I mean, they didn't choose it no one time. And the second course with which it was option, I mean, business and human rights, and the second course was regional economical integration. So the structure of this course was very much, both courses a bit different, because to recall, I put just from the beginning the question, why does business need human rights for the economists in this program for economist students? And of course, I put less law for economists and more motivation, more some interdisciplinary thing. And I put more law, of course, more attention to legal frame, to lawyers. Actually, I put in the course, I mean, I think that, so my approach, at least my approach, was to teach this very complexly and like multidisciplinary. And coming back to the question, who should teach this course? I would say like business and human rights expert. I don't know how to, because when I'm saying, it depends actually on the course. If you do general course, of course, it cannot teach a person who doesn't know general frame of business, human rights, UN guiding principles or something, because it actually is a separate philosophy for me, this topic in general. If it's some narrow course, for example, I don't know, human rights in PR, for example, in advertising, of course, it can be like somebody who understands in this. But to my mind, actually, for example, my background is international law, but I was reading a lot in public relations, in economy, I was reading even Schumpeter, the father of innovative economy term, and I mean, because, you know, I was interested in this. Maybe, of course, no, maybe, I mean, no, not everybody law professor can and will and want do the same. And actually, so this is the, depends, so who should teach depends on what is the course, what is the content of the course. And actually, it was included in this course the practical part about Belarus case studies in 3 dimensions: business worker, business consumer, business local community. Actually, just classical frame of the business human rights topic. We divided these cases. We devoted at least a couple of classes to each of them. And for, of course, about due diligence concept, and of course, about possible mechanisms of control of like remedies and so on, so on. So, and for economists, I also was talking about non-financial reporting and paid a lot of attention to non-financial reporting, because I think this is a clue, one of clues to successful moving of this topic. So, and it's formal education, but I had also experience in informal education about teaching business and human rights. We had a big project of academical cooperation with Raoul Wallenberg Institute on Human Rights and Humanitarian Law. And actually the first person from whom I've heard first time for the business and human rights was Radu Maras. From that institute. So, and we used to do the summer school for students of Belarusian universities in Lund. And they were professors from Lund and me teaching in these schools, in these summer schools. So one of them we devoted totally to business and human rights. It was in 2019. It was a very interesting experience as well, because they were not only law students, but students independently on specialization. They were mixed group, 30 persons mixed group of economists, law students, even public relations students. So it was very interesting experience actually. And when I was teaching in that school, it was 1 week school, I understood and I convinced myself deeply that, more deeply, that it should be very interdisciplinary approach for them. And finally, the education of adults is one more thing. And actually, colleagues already was speaking about business schools here. When we were writing our country guide, we came to one person, economical expert and big businessman in Belarus, who is running one of the biggest and popular business school in Belarus. And he's doing MBA with international certificate. And we starting to talk with him like, maybe you are interesting, so what you think? And he was like, come on guys, it's very interesting, but nobody will pay for this. So I'm saying that people who is doing this are saying, okay, and then we asked him what we should do to make people pay for this. Because, it's useless to have education without any demands for this education, because it will be for nobody. Of course, we can teach some theoretical things and they will rest on this theoretical level, but we need to make world better, but not just to teach something. So that's why, and he was saying, and our businessmen as well, they were saying that for example, human rights due diligence audit, if it would be, for example, compulsory, of course, like managers will have, yes, it would be popular, it would be useful, such course, how to do this, how to make this and so on, or this non-financial reporting if we have human rights indicators in this. So, and something like this. But, and again, we coming back to the legislation and the role of legislation. Of course, in this, yes, there is a big role of legislation to build the frame for this, for example. But as well, it's not the only answer, because corporate culture and, for example, when you are a PR manager and when your firm ordered some advertising from some advertising company and they show you the product, some sexist, things, that's one of the bitch in Belarus advertising market, all this sexist advertising, and you not only because there is a law, but because just you as a PR manager have to say, oh no, guys, I'm sorry, but we will not pay money for this because we are like, we value very much our reputation. But again, the Institute of Reputation is a very big clue to the resolving of problems and to the teaching of this, about teaching this topic. And the Institute of Reputation is not developed in our region as well. So actually, that's it.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Deikala. So wrapping up, I was delighted to moderate this session. And one thing that came up on a couple of occasions is that one of the major obstacles we face while promoting business and human rights values is the skeptical attitude of the business. And here, to conclude, I would say that the purpose is to make it economically inefficient to violate human rights. That's the first aim. And second, to make the business realize that it is economically inefficient to violate human rights. Concluding, I should say that we are supposed to have questions from the audience, but unfortunately we've run out of time. And so I encourage everyone to communicate during our coffee break. We'll have a coffee break for 15 minutes from now on. And also you are allowed to take coffee with you here and not to waste your time. So enjoy your time, communicate informally, and see you in the next session.
So, dear colleagues, dear friends, we are ready to start our third session. And taking into account that I don't have such an excellent pronunciation as my colleague Bogdan, and also because of all our panel consists from Ukrainian colleagues, so I probably will switch into Ukrainian. I think it will be more convenient. Yeah, so you can listen in translation. Доброго дня, шановні друзі, мене звати Олександр
Good afternoon, dear friends. I'm Alexander Sidelnikov. It is my pleasure to facilitate the third session today. And we're going to speak about the Ukrainian experience of business and human rights teaching experience of Ukrainian universities. I'm happy to present the participants of the panel discussion, but let me present them one by one as they speak, and that will be more academic. So I'm happy to moderate, to facilitate this discussion, because for a long time we have been working with Olena on topics, on themes of integration of business and human rights teaching at Ukrainian universities. Last year, when I worked in the office of OSCE coordinator in Ukraine, we got very interested in the idea, in this idea of teaching this training course for students, and we came up with the initiative to support Olena and the lab for them to develop this wonderful syllabus, which I hope in the future will be actively promoted and taught. But when preparing to moderate this panel discussion, I went back to that syllabus. I looked through it, and I'd like to mention that for me, this is the history about BHR teaching. It's not only the story of expanding this knowledge and promoting it among students. That's also about improvement of the education of the degree in law. Because if you look at that syllabus, at that curriculum, it is very high quality. It is multidisciplinary. It covers most of sectors of law, and I believe that those students who have graduated from bachelor, who have got their bachelor degree and who pursue their master degree, by undertaking this course, they can really summarize and nicely complete wrap their education in law and focus on their practice, because this syllabus contains a lot of applied practical components, and I am absolutely sure that this syllabus is no worse than any other syllabus in the area from Western universities. So this is a short introduction, and I'm sure that our colleagues also have very positive experience there, and I will be grateful if they share this experience with us. And first of all, I would like to pass the floor to Katerina Burakovska, PhD, expert of the International Lab on Business and Human Rights of Yaroslav Mudry National Law University, and she will present a review of BHR component in curricula of legal and economic professions. Thank you. If I may, can I ask you to show my presentation on the screen? So I'm happy to welcome you here at this very respected, high-profile event. This is my great honor to be a participant, to be in the audience of this outstanding event. I have also had the honor to contribute to development and to translating a lot of materials that have been included into the syllabus that Alexander has mentioned. And I hope that it will be implemented, that it will be used as a syllabus within the curriculum that is taught, and we will be a role model for others. So while they are launching my presentation today, I was going to speak about the review of BHR component in curricula for students of law and economics in Ukraine. But when we started pursuing that, and if you just Google BHR, you cannot really stop. So we try to systematize the entire context, the picture of education in the field of BHR. So this is going to be about international experience and experience of informal education.
Тому я сьогодні представляю питання освітнього.
Today, I'm going to present on BHR in the following aspects: components of curricula at universities, private or public, then education, BHR education with the support of legal or business and human rights clinics and various hubs, and also massive open online courses where everybody can have access to this knowledge and to this education, and the Ukrainian experience, which I would like to cover at the end. So when we speak about business and human rights in the curricula abroad, so not in the Ukrainian context, you immediately pay attention to the fact that this is very relevant, especially for those who pursue profession in economics. So today we heard presentations from our guests, and they mentioned that globally more than 140 universities have added BHR subjects as a separate training course or as the disciplines, and so most often these are parts of the syllabi of various disciplines, not separate disciplines. And even concern about that recently the graduates from schools of economics do not meet modern requirements set for businesses. In that context, several fora have been established, or networks that we mentioned today: the global network, business at economic universities for schools of economics, to promote the idea of human rights.
One of the achievements of these networks is the development of some technical issues. The development of the practical toolkit for teaching human rights for economists. And the main message of the toolkit is that business schools that do include human rights into their curriculum will be regarded as leaders in education in the 21st century. We've also mentioned today a teaching forum, teaching business and human rights forum, that teach BHR in this or that format while maintaining the same idea. With the participation of this forum participants, an online manual or online guideline for teaching BHR was developed with practical tips, recommendations for those who teach. As I was looking for information on teaching this discipline under the master programs, I was really eager to come across a true master program fully dedicated to BHR. Unfortunately, such cases are very rare. Most often it's all about some selected courses introduced to some programs. And I've studied the curricular of both business and legal and economic schools. For instance, the University of Applied Sciences in Zurich included this discipline into the bachelor program for international management bachelors. Another Paris university has also a dedicated course. If we are talking also about the Eastern region, about the Eastern Europe, then you can see that the master program on international law and human rights, business and human rights, is taught during 2 semesters. 9 leading universities of Russia make a consortium that teach the master course International Protection of Human Rights. And of course, I cannot help but mention the course developed by distinguished Ms. Katerina for Belarusian University. High schools also implement this idea through certificate program like business and human rights. Here we can see a couple of examples. For instance, the example of Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. So that's Ukrainian experience. Business and human rights is also an integral part of LLM programs. So these are programs for full-blown lawyers, barristers, and lawyers. This is an obligatory module, by the way. At the University of Greenwich, according to them, they've implemented an unprecedented course under LLM, which is entitled Business, Human Rights and Environment. And please pay attention that the social sciences faculty, the full-scale program Business and Human Rights has been implemented, and this program is taught by famous Medhen O'Brien. So this topic, business and human rights, is also subject to various studies for postgraduate students, PhD students. Now, this topic is quite popular, and in Ukraine, we also can enjoy the international PhD program funded by Bavaria, namely 3 universities from Bavaria, from Germany. Today, we have also mentioned such phenomena as clinics and hubs. As example, I can mention University of New York, the Center for Business and Human Rights, then Geneva Center for Business and Human Rights. The University of Pretoria also provides a very powerful support to business and human rights. They have already implemented LLM program, so this is a very important component in their teaching curricula. We should also say that
серйозну складову освіти в сфері бізнесу і прав людини складають
business and human rights teaching is relying significantly on open data, on open resources, such as course developed by HELP department at the Council of Europe. There is also a course developed under the Global Campus Go Human Rights Initiative. There are also well-known and respected experts in the field of business and human rights. And the University of Applied Sciences in Zurich has been the first university that developed online course and uploaded it to edX platform. Regarding Ukrainian experience, maybe this is the most important thing for all of us today. We can speak about the certificate program, human rights in business environment, being offered at the Rule of Law Center under the Ukrainian Catholic University. There has been at least one round of this certification. We can also mention the practical course implemented by the National Law University, Yaroslav Mudry University. This course was developed with the participation of Ms. Elena Uvarova and Mr. Pinta de Albuquerque. Speaking about traditional education, anyway, we managed to get information about at least 3 universities, public universities of Ukraine, having the idea of teaching business and human rights discipline. For instance, Kiev International Affairs Law, International Affairs Institute has a mandatory discipline. Then at the University of Technical Sciences, they've also got an optional discipline with the wonderful name, Human Rights in the Field of Business. Then the Hetman University, Kiev National Economic University, also runs the bachelor program, International Law, and the master program, International Commercial Law. There we have mandatory discipline, protection of human rights in the commercial relations. Thank you. Thank you very much for this wonderful overview. Thus, we get a more holistic picture. Thank you so much. Now we are continuing to discuss teaching of BHR at Ukrainian universities with our colleagues from various regions. You will have about 10 minutes per your report. I would like you to cover three key questions at least. So number 1, do Ukrainian universities realize the need for teaching business and human rights? Next, is there the capacity, skills, and knowledge of the personnel, of the staff? And what are the bureaucratic hurdles on the way to incorporating these disciplines? I would like to start with Mr. Mikhailo Savchin. He is a well-known researcher in the field of constitutional law. He participated in the first panel at our event. Now it's time to speak in front of you during this panel, and at 6 o'clock he will also participate in another event. He represents National University of the City of Uzhhorod, so please start. So good evening, dear colleagues. Actually, it's merely late night. I'm from Uzhhorod. I'm So I was actually introducing myself. I said that I'm from Zakarpattia region, therefore I can see the neighboring country, Slovakia. And on the other hand, we have just mountains. Everything has started at our university with the legal clinic. Its focus was refugees. We got the support from UN Office of High Commissioner for Refugees, and we had many events dedicated to refugees' rights. We visited Budapest and Ljubljana to study their experience. So this topic is really close to our heart. Let's continue the discussion of legal clinics. In Zakarpattia, 2/3 of population live in the villages, so the level of urbanization is very low. Therefore, most of our legal clinics specialize in labor laws, labor rights, and social rights. And we also deal with some minimum standards of social partnership, because we've got really small enterprises, small companies, small business in our area. We do not have an acute problem of social responsibility of corporations, because there are no big corporations. Some foreign companies working in Zakarpattia and hiring our people even offer higher standards, and higher standards than are common for the rest of Ukraine. So we let's say started with the clinic, with the social partnership, and gradually this topic penetrated to my teaching practice. Some of my students, for instance, graduate from our university and then they start their own business, or they join some big companies. So law students do not work as lawyers anymore. Together with the Visegrad University, we've initiated the teaching of case law from the European Court of Human Rights. Classical universities indeed have master programs with this topic, business and human rights, especially economic faculties, management faculties. And I also know that in case of accreditation, there are certain requirements to meet. The teachers, the professors working at these high schools that undergo the procedure of accreditation also have to implement somehow this theoretical knowledge in practice. They have to be involved in research and applied science. The business should be responsible not only within social partnership. There is also another concept, namely the concept of sustainable development, which is gaining on importance. There are also issues of production standards, eco-friendliness of production. Since the natural resources are scarce, there is the need to use them rationally, and respectively, businesses responsible, should be responsible, and the access to the natural resources is also um, relevant for human rights. So as a result of all these trends and developments, we started teaching business and human rights. And we also have separate blocks of this discipline, like freedom of entrepreneurship in the broader sense of freedom of occupation. Now, I'm heading the institute, research institute. We are publishing some papers, some manuals. Some time ago, we also published another paper, another manual dedicated to this topic. One of the co-authors is Ms. Olena Uvarova as well. And these guidebooks, these textbooks, let's call them, are used in our educational process. The big cities like Kiev, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, and Dnipro also started focusing on the discipline. But anyway, any teacher, any professor should be aware. Let me emphasize once again, we've got a very small city, 120,000 people, but after our education, after they graduate from our programs, people go to bigger cities and start working at large companies. Last year, for instance, we faced with a significant crisis, energy crisis, and at our university, it was common to mobilize the researchers to find possible solutions. Thank you very much. We wish you lots of success. Hopefully, you are going to expand this component. Well, we can just publish the book and call it Human Rights. So Mr. Golovati calls human rights the rights of people, and the moderator actually says that it would be really difficult to translate this difference between human rights and the rights of humans. This is actually a philosophical issue. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Ms. Ulevska, the head of the department. Yes, the head of the department at the Zaporizhia Institute of Economics and Information Technologies. Zaporizhia is an industrial city, and there are lots of enterprises, lots of companies violate people's rights, in particular environmental rights. The citizens complain about pollution and emissions and so on. So, thank you. I'd like to give you an example of small regional schools like ours. Our leadership, our rector, worked in the Great Britain, in England. He's open to proposals and is always ready to support the innovations. So for me, everything started in 2017. It was after my first visit to this round table, business and human rights. I started working on research papers, and then I started teaching international economic law. And one of the topic, regulation of transnational corporations. And under this topic, we additionally focused on the business and human rights. I've selected all necessary literature for this purpose, and students found this topic very interesting. Then I started considering, Mr. Mikhailov has mentioned, the focus should be shifted from solely transnational corporations, big business, to small and medium-sized business, because the world of business, the world of big business, let's say, is under more stringent supervision than small business, which is quite common for Ukraine. But business and human rights topic is no less relevant for small business than for big business, as has been mentioned. Our region is industrial and agricultural at the same time. We've got lots of agricultural holdings, lots of agribusiness. So we are experiencing some environmental problems. Environmentalization and anthropologization of law also can be reflected in this course, business and human rights. If one does not understand this intersection, then one just doesn't understand the global trends. Now we are speaking about soft law and hard law. This is a debate. I know that education is the most efficient tool for promoting soft law. At our university, we have the course including the topic of corporate responsibility, and then I also using the administrative resources, as Mr. Mikhailov has mentioned, decided to implement these new trends. Our bachelor program is very young, and I decided, since I'm the head of the chair, we might promote this for the bachelor students. The business and the human rights discipline could be made optional for our students. And the rector supported us. We've got still 2 years to develop the methodology. And I'm also involved in gender equality and rights of women. This is another course we are teaching. This is the first year we are doing this. The educational curricula should be based on the standards, and the standards include a list of competences. However, any university, any high school can add some extra competences like added value, and through these extra competences, in light of these extra competences, so we can implement these additional courses and disciplines. I'm absolutely sure that there will be demand. Everything, of course, will depend on the quality. It would be, in this respect, really cool to hold some trainings for teachers, like training. And I think that our ideas will be successfully put into practice. Thank you, Ms. Anna. You have raised a couple of important topics. At our panel, we are discussing the issue whether the course should be taught separately or in an integrated manner. Having listened to your presentation, I decided that both approaches have the right to exist. this course should be integrated into the curriculum of constitutional, civil, environmental law, and so on. And besides, it can be introduced also as an additional, as some extra course for many specialties. I think this is actually the change of approach to teaching, and this change is not realistic unless there are teachers, there are professors able of doing this. At our academy, we see this as a very important direction for the future projects, and really I have already something on my mind, and this idea hopefully will be developed later on. We've got also here colleagues from international organizations, so please mind what directions can be really promising for cooperation. Thank you. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Ms. Ludmila Adashas, PhD, Associate Professor of International Law from the University of Customs and Finance. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It's such a delight to participate in this forum second year in a row. This participation is so inspiring. I see so many colleagues around. Some of you, of course, are online, but still the atmosphere is really resourceful and inspiring. And I would like to refer to Ms. Olena Uvarova, to one conversation with her. Last year, we discussed an event, and she invited me to this event.
So a special BHR discipline is not taught at our university, but 2 years ago, I suggested human rights in the globalized world. I suggested that as an optional subject for the students. I tried to to introduce it nicely, and I have 5 themes: human rights and technical progress, discrimination, globalization with human face, and the next topic is human rights, business and human rights. And in this way, for the whole optional subject, we have 90 hours, half this is class work. Well, I don't know, since this year, it is the first time when the students of 3 specialties have decided to pursue this discipline. This is international law, international relations, and philologists. For some reason, economists did not opt for this discipline. But again, to respond to what Alexander mentioned, this is about barriers for optional subjects. Of course, we understand that while we have the situation that the student mostly makes this decision not freely, but following recommendation of the dean, or, well, yes, they are not very aware. The awareness level is not that high. Well, yes, that's true. But again, the content of the discipline, well, the students are introduced to the syllabus, but maybe it is not very informative for them. And there, the lecturer, professor may be guided by his or her own reputation. But again, students need to know you're supposed to have had some, have done some teaching for them, because without that, the reputation will not really help, because there's students who recommend that she's good or not so good. So sure, during this year, I'm going to teach for 3 specialties, and we've been teaching BHR for 1 semester, and we will see the satisfaction perception level if I have tried to present too much information, too many things packed, like globalization, BHR, tolerance, etc. So maybe I will further adjust the syllabus, but this communication and the experience that I gain here, well, hopefully that will have a positive effect on the students to be business persons. So that is briefly it. Thank you. Thank you so much. And that was really the problem related to the fact that university education here is organized in such a way that children very early become students. Yes, I would like to make a comment there because you mentioned the syllabus. Yes. So we have this experience where you need to really explain things well in the syllabus because professors sometimes do not know how to do that. Often they come up with just plan of their lectures or seminars. I remember when I developed my first methodological publication, I discovered that I wrote it as a syllabus. For example, there is the notion of human rights, the concept of human rights. So I explain the main grounds, the principle of equality, freedom, dignity, and I explain the essence and the content of the right. So this is what needs to be developed. And often when I analyze these materials, I come up with this comment because otherwise syllabus would not be informative because really our students are very young. And I remember we had this international conference with Poland, Slovakia, and we discussed this concept of postgraduate students. So this is rather for senior students, right? But if the curriculum is not detailed enough, then it would not be informative, of course. This is like plan of lectures, but what exactly that's going to be about, you need to be more detailed. And I believe that this is the approach that we apply now for administrative law, for constitutional law. We have done this year, and the students said that it was easier for them when they passed their admission exams, because they could ground on that. And of course, if it is an optional subject, there are greater chances that they will opt for this subject if you do the syllabus this way. So you need to, of course, this is about the theoretical part. Theoretical part is more straightforward, but the practical part, you need to provide them more details. So you are speaking about syllabus as a methodological guidelines. Yes, because there are various methods of testing too, but you have all of that in the practical part. Actually, you're absolutely right, because Professor Barabash at the beginning mentioned that in summer we had this school on teaching of constitutional law for professors, for lecturers. And there we discovered this problem, that in our law education tradition syllabus, it is something that doesn't matter, something that students do not actually use, they do not follow it. So this is not really a roadmap that they grant on. I remember when I was a student here in Kharkiv, I never even looked at those syllabi. But if you are in the Western university, that is an integral and important part of your training, where based on which you can already receive like half of the knowledge that you will gain, where it is presented in a lot of detail. So that's also no doubt an important issue, but there are so many problems really that impact the situation, that where we introduce it as an optional subject, sometimes students are reluctant to opt for that, or they follow some prescriptions, orders of the management of universities. And this is one thing that university education starts very early at the university at the age of 16, 17, and then the university education is quite cheap and accessible. So sometimes students are not motivated to try hard, because if you pay like $1,000 a year, while in US or Western Europe it can be 20, 40, even $100,000 annually. So these are different things. So that's not so much about business and human rights, but rather about problems in the very field of education and law. But it is clear now what the obstacles are, and I believe it is an important comment for our discussion. And now I would like to pass the floor to Daria Nahaivska, who is a business coach and an expert of corporate equality index. I don't quite know what transactional analyst in organizations is, so maybe you will explain that. Thank you. You make an important contribution in Kharkiv into this field, so it is very interesting to hear your experience. Thank you. For me, it is a great honor to be here today at the forum. And I also value this opportunity to have these meetings every year in September at the forum, because this is a good opportunity to discuss the challenges that we have and to develop this agenda based on which we work in the countries that we represent. I would like to focus on informal education because the colleague has just described the academic part. So what I know about universities, I have been thinking about approaches to BHR teaching, and I was thinking about who's going to teach that. And I know how at universities they distribute the workload. I know that this may be quite a challenge, especially when we speak about that in Kharkiv. Now they are amalgamating universities, and when 3 universities come together, are amalgamated, so people understand that it used to be 3 dean's offices, now it's 1, 3 departments, now it's 1. So you encounter other problems other than focus and interest to quickly studying something new and teaching this discipline. So I thought that maybe the approach that could be used is that teachers, lecturers, they also undergo the advanced training at universities, and maybe the discipline of BHR could be an option for the advanced training and integration of the SIM in the curriculum. Because when we speak about business, this is economy of enterprises, management, finance, audit, and all of these disciplines could include this module that will expand business practices and that will contribute to development of these links between the subject and the actual world, between businesses, the state, citizens. Because now we are speaking about that business responsibility is growing, and that is also in view of various interconnected aspects. And what's happening is happening transparently. I mean, where business trespasses some red lines, that is immediately covered in social media, and that generates information campaign, awareness raising campaign, or aggression against a company. And there, one of important messages for people who work in the company and for the company as such is that you can prevent these reputational risks for businesses. And for corporate social responsibility, B2B and human rights. So people who work in business or who pursue a degree in economics, they often do not see the difference between these notions, how it is implemented in business practices. This is one aspect. Another aspect for responsible business behavior, companies often want to use that for their PR. And there, this mutual links of various aspects and understanding of how business is linked with the practices for respect for human rights, the impact, social and environmental impact on the communities, the fines, penalties that can apply to companies. This is about understanding of the diversity of this phenomenon and outcomes of business activities. That is an integral part of business decision-making, especially when we speak about the CEOs, leaders of companies. So this discussion has helped me to better develop my vision and understanding of education. And I understand that in BHR SIM, we need to do advocacy. We need to include that into MBA programs in Ukraine and in training courses for CEOs. And because I checked curricula for managers, CEOs, and I see that this is not a module of that would be included into those curricula, but it needs to be really transversal. And because when I talk to companies, they say that we have 2 consultants, for example, who deal with this lockdown related restrictions and equality, and we don't need any more people there. So this is also about creating demand in the market for demand for consultants for BHR. I'm not sure that the demand is high enough now. However, our joint challenge is to develop this culture, to develop the culture of doing business. And here, I would also like to emphasize that, for example, the Office for Development of Entrepreneurship and Export is now implementing a programs in Ukraine that are aimed at helping Ukrainian companies to start working in the European market, and integration of that aspect into those curricula, as well as curricula for consultants, advisors on various aspects of business activities, that would matter. That is something that could be efficient, because business trainers, business consultants, they later implement the independent practices, and they can include that into their trainings. So this is additional opportunity to include BHR into advanced training for lecturers, as I mentioned. This year, it was a flash of revelation for me that only this year, the Ukrainian School of Governance launched the program Human Rights for Public Officials and Civil Servants. And when I held the training in Kyiv for representatives of the Supreme Court, for the 2 national commissions there, I realized that that they lack understanding of human rights, of what that is, when we speak about even some foundational main concepts. And that's also a challenge, because speaking about human rights, discrimination, these are rather popular terms, concepts that are often covered in the media, but often people do not understand what that's about. And this is about that these straightforward, simple things that you never can repeat them enough. And it is also important to integrate them into an advanced training course for professionals. And when I also work in an NGO, Modern Woman, we deal with diversity, inclusion, protection of women's rights, and we were thinking about how to make this theme of business and human rights, how to make it understandable for companies. And we opened this book, Business and Human Rights, and we realized that everything is there already. And we asked the organization, we realized that what we need to work on is rather advocacy, because actually our international partners have done a lot, and Ukrainian companies are working in this direction, but also companies can respect human rights and support vulnerable groups, but they don't know how to communicate that. And that's also an important task, to raise awareness, to convey this information, to integrate businesses, so that companies started using our language, our lingo, idiom, to speak about what they do. And also we mentioned this hook today, so I believe that for Ukraine, this is about transparency and rule of law, because businesses very clearly understand the requirements for procurement and corruption risks there, that they may lose certain orders, but this is the language of business. But rule of law, this is where business find themselves in a difficult situation where the court makes a fair decision. So various actors are interested in making the system functional, implementing rule of law. And I believe that it is one of the important, valuable approaches that could help us to bring together business sector and NGOs and the government around the theme of respect and protection of human rights. Thank you, Daria, for this very profound and extensive reflections. I believe that it would be also very relevant to integrate that into business education, MBA. curricula, and I've been thinking about where are the intersections of HR with administrative law. And even there, I did find a lot of points of intersection or entry points, because so I believe that in that area we should work, and that will not be easy to cooperate with the government, considering the fact that the law on administrative procedures, it still takes time for them to adopt that. But requesting or promoting cooperation with the state, with the government, with businesses, with us, to comply with business obligations, that is very promising. Thank you for these reflections. Now I have this question. Do we have Olena Dashkovska here? I don't really see her. Maybe not. So then we can wrap up the presentation part, and maybe you have questions now. You're welcome.
Yes, sorry, just one very practical question. What I found very interesting, what Daria said, was about the entrepreneurship programs for SMEs. And who is taking care of it? Is it really possible to include business and human rights elements into it?
Тут є декілька організацій в Україні або інституції, які зараз
There are
займаються
several organizations in Ukraine or institutions that do this business training, in particular for representatives of SMEs. In particular, this is Office for Development of Entrepreneurship and Export. They are open to dialogue with the civil society. There is a standing program where they train consultants, advisors on expert, and they are very much open to these ideas of introducing amendments to curriculum. And these programs on expert, they include a module that is focused on involvement of companies into global supply chains. So they do address these issues, and it would be important to enhance this component. While if we speak about business programs implemented by NGOs, usually those curricula, they are decided by the NGO in cooperation with donors. And here, from the side of donor organizations, international partners, it is also possible to raise awareness, to attract attention, and to make sure that this aspect is covered in the training program. Any other questions? If not, I would like to also pass the floor to Yulia Razmetaeva. She is PhD associate professor. I will pass over to her.
Перекладачі закінчують свою роботу.
Our interpreters are going to wrap up, so it would be important for Yulia to speak now. Otherwise, we can stay and discuss more questions. But now I would like to pass the floor to Yulia, head of the Center for Law, Ethics and Digital Technologies, and to speak about business and human rights in digital technologies. So you're welcome.
Доброго дня. Я дуже коротко презентую.
Good afternoon. I will try to be very brief presenting our curriculum. And this is the subject that we taught this spring at the support of the Embassy of Netherlands in Ukraine and together with NGO Kharkiv Foundation Громадська Альтернатива. Let's go to the next slide.
Цей курс був доволі довгий.
So this training course, it was quite long. But this is because it is focused on practitioners, business representatives, representatives of public authorities, and NGOs, academic community. So Actually, we had the sessions once every 2 weeks, and in between, they received certain assignments, case studies that we later discussed at the sessions. And as a result, so actually this was as a result of the pandemic, it was mostly online on Zoom. We had 9 main modules of the training course: business and human rights in the digital medium, privacy in digital epoch, freedom of expression, and the digital duty of the state to protect human rights implementation in the digital context, corporate politics and procedures, transparency via reporting or accountability, and access to human rights in the context of digital technology. So this is focused on digital tech, and so all the themes were not just about business and human rights, but all of that in the context of the digital. And this is an example of the formats that we used. So we discussed the pre-sent case studies, and we had 2 groups because we had to divide them depending on their availability to participate in the training. We wanted to offer several alternatives, so those who cannot join us on this day, so that they could join us on Zoom on another day, because most of these people, they had a job. These were not students mostly. And several assignments, like 5, 6, or 3, depending on the module, they received several assignments. Sometimes they were mandatory, sometimes they could choose 1 or 2 cases that they would discuss and comment on. At the end of the training course, together with the participants, we developed a document on recommendations, what should be done by the state, what should be done by our government in the field of business and human rights and in the digital context. So as a result, we came up with this set of recommendations. There was also the letter for further reading that was optional, and that was long enough, but people could pick up some references and follow the links. Those were articles in the media or research papers. They were available in 2 languages, Ukrainian and English. This is one of the modules. This is privacy in digital time. There were suggested issues or items for discussion. This is right to privacy in the digital era, what it means privacy versus the government, risks in the field of surveillance, privacy for businesses, and what could be done by the individuals in order to improve the situation. At the end, after when they approached completion of the training, we had this final training. So in June, we managed to bring people together, those who could not join offline, as well as today, they were connected in this hybrid mode. And the training, we analyzed a range of specific themes. This is EU Digital Compass, for example. We discussed that with the participants. They also had some practical assignments so that they could somehow apply the knowledge that they obtained in the course of the training of the training. This is very briefly about the training course. It was quite a pilot endeavor, but we are very happy with the outcomes because all the participants were very motivated, and those who stayed with us like for 3/3 of the time allocated, they're still in touch, and some use the knowledge gained, and they give us feedback on how they use that in their areas of activity. Some of them are our supporters. They now participate in the forum. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions regarding this training course, I will be happy to address them. Yes, you're welcome to ask questions.
your students weren't actually students, they had other jobs. So what kinds of jobs did they have and how did you kind of get them into your course?
Так, у нас були люди.
Well, we had people of representing different professions. We had a judge.
From commercial court.
Yes, he was a judge of commercial court. Then there were representatives of IT companies. There were people from the office of the Ombudsperson of the Верховна Rada Commissioner for Human Rights. There were also lawyers, meaning defenders, and how they use that now. No, just the range of your participants. Well, there were also people who work at universities, including our university, and also at some universities where they even lead data science, open data programs. So they were very much interested in kind of this exchange of experience exercise. And there were several human rights activists who do not work in the field of law, but they provide advice. They help people to submit documents or to undertake some activities in the context of human rights activism. And there were several students from, I believe, 3 from universities, most motivated ones. So we had both young students and people who have like 20 years of experience.
So you asked only about participants, who they were. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? Чи є інші питання?
Ну, ми не знаємо, у нас же була фінансова підтримка.
And we don't know. We had financial support. We had funding from the embassy of Netherlands. So these people were admitted for free of charge training. I don't remember how many people submitted their applications. So we received motivational letters, and since it was free of charge, we admitted those who wrote the best motivational letters, and they also had to fill in a questionnaire on their expectations, where they're going to use this knowledge, where they work, etc. Then I have a question to all people here. So if it is possible now or one day in the future, that maybe it will be a specialized master program that students will undertake because it is a promising area for their work. So if it is feasible perspective or not. I mean that students come and pay for this specialization within their master training.
Yes, this is the question to everyone, actually. In my opinion, it will be realistic as soon as the regulation is more stringent. So with the legal liability, the companies will have to meet new requirements, and of course companies will be aware of the need of the right specialists, right professionals in the relevant field. As Ms. Daria has said, the demand is at the moment unfortunately low, but I'm sure this is going to change.
Directly to the question that you just raised, my counter question would be, is it actually desirable? Like, do we need a master on business and human rights, or would the goal rather be to integrate this topic into everything where it is relevant? And I was so inspired by the diversity of the panelists already, and the fact that you are already the converted, so to say. And I like the idea of sorry, I'm going to refer to you by your first name because it's easier for me, like Ghana, for example, to think about a training of trainers. And it really got a lot of thoughts in my head where I was thinking, for me, it's not about creating human rights experts. I was talking about earlier on about breaking down the terminology and making it something that people can relate to from different areas. And you also raised the question of how does it relate to business administration, you know? And I think that's the part that, for example, us as like human rights people cannot bring. But if we're working in a like training of trainers setting and we come with a core content, what from a business and human rights perspective, what is the relevant thing we want people to know, irregardless of where they are from? And then we put every professor puts their own spin on it related to their own area of expertise. So an economics professor, you know, is best at knowing how that relates to their area of expertise and how it links to the relevant career path of the students. I think we can all agree that without a doubt, this field is relevant to all of us as human beings, right? So I think as soon as we got that across, it's about figuring out how it links to our profession. And just allow me one more comment. Another area that we shouldn't neglect is the overlapping agendas. It was mentioned, the SDGs was mentioned. We are talking a lot about climate change, everyone does, and environmental impacts. All of these are human rights related, but maybe not on top of people's minds, which again goes back to breaking down this terminology and talking about it in relatable terms.
Yeah, thank you so much. I totally agree that, yeah, I also think that a specialized master program is like additional way. The more important to integrate this component in like each discipline. Yeah, it's very important because if we want to change this situation with understanding of business and human rights, we should cover a lot of things and yeah, to integrate it into a lot of topics, yeah, starting from constitutional law and I don't know, even philosophy of law, it could be, I think, applicable. Тому, да, будь ласка, будь ласка.
One comment, if we have translation or, yes, we have. Okay, okay, I can say, I can say in two languages by myself, yes. So I can say, I can just add that if you describe the business and human rights topic in one phrase, it's two ways road in everything. I mean, in promoting, in pushing, in educating, in everything. And that's why to integrate, engage, to my mind, it's like discussion whether we need special master course or special course on business human rights, or whether we have to disseminate this knowledge in current legal disciplines or any economical and so on. It's a discussion like what else the egg, what was the first, an egg or an chicken? Yes, because to disseminate this frame in legal disciplines, you have to get knowledge and understanding of the whole frame, because you can't disseminate this in, I mean, you can't understand how business and human rights relates to administrative law if you don't understand what does mean business and human rights. That's why it's like an egg or chicken. But from the other hand, and I totally agree with Dirk that we, coming back to the question in our panel, who should be the end product of these courses, human rights activists or corporate lawyers and so on. I think that whoever, to whom it may concern, you know, it can be said. So it means that it's such special courses, I think that we need such special courses, and they have to be interdisciplinary. They don't have to be only for lawyers, only for economists. For example, the person with economical background can come to such course and get some knowledge in human rights frame, or the person in law background can come to this course and have some knowledge about economy, reputation, things, how it works with human rights. And in as like human rights as economic instrument. So it's like this, but of course the way that Dirk is saying is as well way. So it's two ways.
Thank you so much. And Beata, please.
Just very briefly, I think it might be very useful to look.
Sorry, I need to give our interpreters, we need to say them thank you, and actually this is interpreters worked with us in 2017, and that round table is the same interpreters, and thank you very much, and thank you for work today, and yeah, and we could continue but without interpretation, but it's okay, we could translate.
Yeah, we understand, I think, please.
So basically, I just wanted to point that there are some tools out there which business is already using, which are of relevance to some individual courses. Like there is a whole discussion around accounting and human rights, which is developed as part of the Valuing Respect project. There are a number of, I'm not saying that the paper is perfect, but it's kind of like a good starting point as well for teachers, for trainers, for academics to raise the topic also with their students. So there is some specialized material that we can reach for, kind of, which is more designed as a tool to help companies to understand. So perhaps, yeah, I think we shouldn't forget about reaching for tools which is developed for business. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot. And please, Tara, yes.
Katya, can I ask you to translate for me? Yes. Thank you. I first agree, generally speaking, that when we're talking about who we're training, we're not training human rights experts, but
я согласна, что когда мы говорим про такие тренинги, мы говорим не о том, не наша цель тренировать экспертов по правам человека.
But we also have to keep in mind that that the people doing the training have to have that human rights expertise.
Но то, что мы должны понимать, что люди, которые делают такой тренинг, ну, занимаются этим образованием, они сами должны быть экспертами по правам человека. Ну,
so with that, I really just want to caution all of us in the room, because this is a big issue. It requires a lot of resources, and there are very few of us in the world doing this. I teach across now 9 classes. It's too much for a person, yes. It is too much for a person to do. And so I want to prevent my colleagues from replicating my mistake. Sorry.
Тара говорит, что она сейчас сама преподает 9 предметов. Это очень много, и она хочет всех предупредить от того, чтобы не повторяли ее ошибку.
So I think, generally speaking, we have to think how we can collaborate together to increase and provide the various courses without overstretching any of us.
И ее как бы тезис в том, что как мы должны сотрудничать и каким образом мы можем это сделать для того, чтобы не перегружать себя, но обогащать свои курсы, как бы, да. And actually, I would like to add that I was teaching 5 courses, 5 classes. Yes, when I was working at the university, it was a lot. And the course on business human rights, if you teach it as a course on business and human rights, like general frame course, it takes huge amount of time to prepare and to keep an eye on everything, because my approach is absolutely that, I mean, a lot of people think that it's like labor law, something only because something connected with workers, but like I on purpose did these 2 complex courses just to destroy this illusion and to give to the students this understanding that it's not about just labor code. Otherwise, you have labor law, and so I mean, it doesn't. Duplication, you know. Yes, and you have to keep your eye on a huge amount of questions, but it trains you very much. Yes. Вот, теперь скажу, да, на русском, что я согласна, я сама преподавала 5 курсов, когда я работала в университете, я работала на 1,5 ставки и была еще заведующей кафедрой, ну, как бы при этом, вот, и это было ужасно, и
курс по бизнесу и правам человека вот в магистратуре. На самом деле, когда экономисты не выбирали этот курс, я говорила слово спасибо, потому что и тогда мне приходилось, ну, потому что для юристов он был обязателен, а если бы они его выбирали, это было бы плюс еще мне один курс, но это ужасно. Но этот курс требует занимал у меня огромную подготовку, очень много времени на подготовку, потому что ты должна держать, ну, как бы глаз свой на, я уже с английской кальки, на очень на кучу вопросов. Потому что у нас такой стереотип был очень много у студентов, даже у юристов, о том, что это про только работника, про права работника, про трудовое право. Но на самом деле
конечно.
моя цель как раз была в том, вот комплексный такой подход, чтобы разбить эту иллюзию и объяснить, что это, ну, то есть как бы это не то, что трудовое право. У меня спросила одна девочка один раз, зачем нам этот курс, если у нас есть трудовое право? Ну, то есть вот такое, как бы, да. Вот. И вообще это очень важно от того, насколько в стране эта тема ну, на плаву. Потому что если она вообще не на плаву, то сначала важны курсы комплексные, а не узкие. Потому что если, ну, как бы сначала важно поставить философию, ценностный подход к этому предмету. Если тема, конечно, очень сильно уже распространена в стране, то вообще, в принципе, в обществе, да, есть понимание, в более продвинутом обществе, где правовая культура другая, корпоративная культура, тогда, конечно, супер, они разбиваются на миллион мелких курсов, начиная, как я уже говорила, даже для PR-менеджеров конкретно, да, там, для HR-менеджеров. Вот. I'm saying there's the additional things that I was not saying in English. That if the last my thesis just translate for English people, English-speaking people, that it depends very much. The concept of courses and content of courses depends very much on how this topic is widespread in the country, because if it's not absolutely accepted, understandable, you have to have at least this general first courses to put just philosophy, to put this values of the topic, just to put the frame of values. And if the country with more like culture of this business and human rights, you can split these courses in very narrow things concerning just even maybe PR or something, non-financial reporting. It can be even separate course. So, but if you will push these narrow things in the society where there is no knowledge in general, it will be useless. I mean, I think. Yes.
Дуже дякую, many thanks, and I think the last remark from Yulia Razmetaeva, and we will finish and continue our discussion during the dinner. And yes, the interesting things will be ahead, and one announcement from whom? Yeah.
Поки є представники вищих навчальних закладів, хотіли розповісти більш детально про конкурс, який опосередковано торкнулася Олена Степаненко, представник уповноваженого. В цьому році вперше проводиться всеукраїнський конкурс наукових робіт «Соціально відповідальне ведення бізнесу, складова сталого розвитку». Нагоди 30-ї річниці незалежності України. Запрошуються студенти закладів вищої освіти, аспіранти та молоді вчені до 30 років включно. Необхідно подати електронну конкурсну роботу, заявку і рецензію, якщо немає ступеню. Прийом робіт до 30 вересня.
So basically, it's an announcement about research papers competitions among students and like PhD students regarding the topic of social rights.
Соціально відповідальне ведення бізнесу, складова сталого розвитку.
Corporate social responsible business, etc. So this competition specifically dedicated to the business and human rights issues for young scholars and students, for law students, юридичних студентів, чи any students, yeah. It's організований Офісом уповноваженого.
Офісом уповноваженого за підтримки Мінекономіки, Міністерства освіти.
It's like supported by Ukrainian government, this competition, very important one. So
Let me add to the sentences.
last remark from Yulia Razmitaeva.
Okay, sense. I would be happy if we will have a master program, Ukrainian master program on business and human rights, but I think it's more realistic to have different short courses, especially for different audience. We had an experience with this Applying Human Rights to Digital tech course, and every time we have two sides, two opposite sides, because we have participants from IT companies who was inside of company, and participants from civil society activists who was against it. But I totally agree with Tara. I forgot to describe that we had a couple of lectures from Ekaterina, for instance, on our course, so I think we can share our experience under this network. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention, and have a nice evening in this beautiful city. Yeah. And see you tomorrow.
Ні, там вже числа організації.
Recording stopped.